Section 1. The opening premise Springfield was never meant to make you laugh. There is a moment in the Season 4 episode Homer the Heretic where Homer Simpson, lying on the couch on a Sunday morning in his bathrobe, decides not to go to church. He makes himself waffles. He dances around the kitchen in his socks. He watches football. He finds a penny on the floor. And at the end of the day, sitting on the porch as the sun goes down, warm and full and completely at peace, he looks up at the sky and says, quietly, that this was the best day of his life. The audience laughs. It is genuinely funny. Homer is ridiculous and self-satisfied, and utterly oblivious to everything around him, and that obliviousness is the joke. But sit with the moment a little longer. A grown man, in his mid-30s, living in a house he owns with a wife who loves him and 3 children who need him. And the best day of his life was spent completely alone. Not on a vacation, not at a celebration, not surrounded by the people he loves. Alone on a couch with waffles and football and a penny he found on the floor. That is the best it has ever been for Homer Simpson. The laugh track moves on, the show moves on. And most people watching moved on too, because The Simpsons trained its audience over many years to move quickly past the feeling underneath the joke and focus on the joke itself. The gag lands, the moment is gone, the next scene begins. That is how the show operates. That is how it has always operated. But what happens when you stop moving past the feeling and sit with it instead? What happens when you take the jokes out, or at least hold them to the light long enough to see what they are made of? What you find, underneath 36 years of gags and callbacks and absurdist cutaways, is something that does not look like a comedy at all. The Simpsons is, at its foundation, a show about people who are quietly suffering. A show about the ways in which ordinary American life grinds people down slowly and without ceremony. A show about a family that loves each other genuinely and completely and still manages to fail each other in nearly every episode. A show about the distance between who we meant to be and who we ended up becoming, and the strange, stubborn grace it takes to keep showing up anyway. That is not a comedy premise. That is the premise of some of the most devastating literature ever written. And yet for 36 seasons, it has been packaged inside jokes, delivered with a laugh track, and sold to the world as the funniest show on television. It is the funniest show on television. That part is also true. Both things are true simultaneously, and the way The Simpsons manages to hold both truths in the same frame at the same time is the single most remarkable thing about it. Consider what the show is actually about, stripped of the animation style and the gags. A man who hates his job but cannot leave it because his family depends on him. A woman who gave up her own ambitions to raise children and support a husband who takes her entirely for granted. A boy who is failing in school, acting out in every direction, and receiving almost no real guidance from the adults who are supposed to help him. A girl who is exceptional in every measurable way and profoundly, achingly alone because of it. And a baby who sits in the background of every scene watching everything, old enough to understand more than anyone realizes, and young enough that no one thinks to ask what she has absorbed. Put those 5 people in a drama and you have a story about a family in crisis. Put them in a cartoon, give Homer a silly voice and a catchphrase, let Bart skateboard past the camera in the opening credits, and you have The Simpsons. The content is almost identical. The container changes everything. This is what we are going to spend the next 4 hours exploring. Not the mysteries of Springfield, not the fan theories or the predictions or the continuity errors, but something quieter and in many ways more unsettling. The emotional truth of The Simpsons. The version of the show that exists underneath the jokes, in the pauses between the gags, in the moments where the comedy format briefly cracks and something raw and real comes through before the laugh track covers it up again. There is a famous quote attributed to E.B. White, the author of Charlotte's Web, about comedy and tragedy. He said that analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. You can do it, but the frog tends to die in the process. Most people who write about The Simpsons are careful to keep the frog alive. They talk about the writing, the cultural impact, the golden age versus the decline, the best episodes and the worst ones. They protect the comedy because the comedy is what makes the show lovable and accessible and safe to think about. This is not that kind of examination. This is the version where we look at what the frog is made of. Not to kill it, but because understanding what is inside something is also a form of love. You do not dig into something this deeply unless it matters to you. The Simpsons matters to an almost unreasonable degree, to an almost unreasonable number of people, and the reason for that is not the jokes. The jokes are the delivery mechanism. The reason is the feeling underneath the jokes, the ache of recognition that hits when Homer does something pathetic, and you realize with a start that you understand exactly why he did it. The reason is that the show looks at ordinary American life and does not flinch away from how difficult that life actually is, how lonely, how repetitive, how full of small defeats and smaller victories, and the particular exhaustion that comes from loving people who will never fully understand you. That is what we are here to talk about. That is what the next 4 hours are for. So settle in, get comfortable, let the room get quiet. This is going to be a long, slow walk through Springfield, and we are going to take our time. The first thing to understand is that the show was born out of grief. Matt Groening, the creator of The Simpsons, has talked in interviews about his own father, a man named Homer Groening, a filmmaker and cartoonist, a dreamer, a man who was funny and warm and also, by his son's account, often absent in the ways that matter most. The names in The Simpsons, Homer, Marge, Bart, Lisa, Maggie, are all drawn from Groening's own family. His parents were Homer and Margaret. His sisters were Lisa and Maggie. He changed his own name to Bart, an anagram of brat, because he did not want to put himself in the cartoon directly. But he put himself in the cartoon. Anyone who has watched the show carefully can see him there, looking out through Lisa's eyes most of the time, occasionally through Bart's. The frustration and the idealism and the loneliness and the desperate need for the family to be better than it is, that is all there. Groening did not invent Springfield. He remembered it. This matters because it means that at the core of the show, underneath everything, there is a real person's real longing. Not a writer's room full of jokes looking for an emotional frame, but an emotional frame that a writer's room full of jokes was built around. The sadness came first. The comedy was the way to make it bearable enough to look at directly. Think about what it means for a show to be structured that way. The humor in The Simpsons is not decoration added to lighten the mood of an otherwise dark story. The darkness is the story, and the humor is the thing that makes it possible to tell the story at all. Remove the jokes and you have a bleak portrait of American working-class life. Remove the darkness, and you have a pleasant but ultimately empty cartoon with no weight behind it. The two are inseparable. They depend on each other. And once you understand that dependency, the show becomes almost impossible to watch without feeling both things simultaneously. The laugh track tells you to laugh. The image on the screen tells you something else. And you end up doing both at the same time, which is a deeply strange and human thing to do, and also exactly what life requires of us constantly. There is a detail from the very first episode of The Simpsons that most people have forgotten, or perhaps never fully registered. The episode aired on the 17th of December 1989. It was a Christmas special called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. And in that episode, Homer discovers that his workplace holiday bonus has been canceled. He cannot afford Christmas presents for his family. Desperate, he takes a job as a department store Santa to earn extra money, and when that does not pay enough, he takes his son Bart to the dog track to bet their earnings on a long-shot greyhound. The greyhound they bet on loses. Homer and Bart stand there in the cold parking lot of a dog track on Christmas Eve with no money and no presents and no plan. And Homer is about to give up entirely when the dog they bet on, the loser, the long shot, runs up to them and licks Homer's face. They bring the dog home. They name him Santa's Little Helper. The family gathers around the sad little tree and laughs, and the episode ends. It is a happy ending. It is also, if you look at it carefully, an ending built on the complete failure of every plan Homer made. He did not solve the problem. He did not earn enough money. He did not get his family the gifts they wanted. He went to a dog track on Christmas Eve and came home with a dog because there was nothing else left to do, and the show asks you to feel good about that. To smile at the scrappiness of it, the way love makes a failure into a kind of victory. The show is asking you to feel two things at once from its very first episode. It is asking you to feel the warmth of a family that loves each other and the chill of a man who, despite loving his family more than anything in the world, cannot quite manage to take care of them. That tension does not resolve. It has never resolved. It is the engine the show has been running on for 36 years. Everything we are going to talk about for the next 4 hours grows from that first episode. The patterns are all there already, laid down in 44 minutes of television in December of 1989. A man trying and falling short. A family absorbing the shortfall and calling it enough. A holiday that was supposed to be magical ending in a parking lot under fluorescent lights with a dog that nobody wanted. That is The Simpsons. That has always been The Simpsons. And the fact that it is also hilarious is not a contradiction. It is the whole point. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you want more of this kind of deep, slow exploration, subscribing means you will be here when the next one goes up. Now let's keep going. Section 2. Homer Simpson and the Architecture of Sadness. Homer Simpson is the funniest character in the history of American animation. He is also, if you are paying attention, one of the saddest. These two things coexist inside him in every single episode, and the way the show manages that coexistence, the way it uses Homer's comedy to deliver Homer's tragedy without ever quite making you feel manipulated by the tragedy, is the central achievement of the entire series. Let us start with the obvious things and work inward from there. Homer is fat. Not just overweight, but cartoonishly, elaborately fat, in a way that the show calls attention to constantly. His stomach enters rooms before he does. Chairs break under him. He eats with an urgency that goes well beyond hunger, shoveling food in with both hands, moaning with pleasure, treating every meal like it might be his last. The show plays this for laughs consistently. Homer smells a pie cooling on a windowsill and his eyes go wide and his tongue rolls out and the audience laughs. But look at when Homer eats. Look at the circumstances. He eats when he is stressed. He eats when he is sad. He eats when he has failed at something or disappointed someone or been humiliated at work. He eats when Marge is angry with him. He eats when the children are ignoring him. He eats alone in the kitchen at midnight, standing in the refrigerator light in his underwear. Not because he is hungry, but because food is the one reliable comfort in his life. The one thing he knows will not let him down or leave him or forget his name. The show does not frame Homer's eating as an addiction or a symptom or a cry for help. It frames it as a personality trait. Homer loves food, haha. Donuts and pork chops and whatever Marge cooked for dinner, even though he already ate at work. But the pattern, if you track it across hundreds of episodes, tells a different story. Homer eats for comfort. Homer eats to fill something that food cannot actually fill. And the show knows this, because when Homer is genuinely happy, genuinely content, genuinely at peace with his life and his family and his place in the world, he eats differently. He savors. He shares. He offers bites to the people around him. He is present with the food in a way that is completely unlike his stress eating, which is fast and private and a little desperate. The donuts are a particularly interesting detail. Homer's relationship with donuts is one of the most sustained jokes in the show, but it is also one of its most revealing images. The donut is literally a circle with nothing in the center. It is sweet and briefly satisfying and leaves you wanting another one. It is, in other words, a perfect physical metaphor for the kind of comfort Homer keeps reaching for and never quite finding. The show made Homer a safety inspector at a nuclear power plant, partly because of the donut joke, because of the image of this specific man in this specific role, eating a donut while reactor warning lights flash behind him. That image is funny. It is also an image of a man who has found a way to stop feeling the danger he lives with every day by replacing the feeling with sugar. This is not overreading. The show itself gestures toward this interpretation in the episode where Homer has a crayon removed from his brain and his intelligence returns. One of the first things his newly functioning brain notices is that his coping mechanisms, the food, the beer, the television, the deliberate incuriosity, are all ways of not thinking, of not feeling, of staying safely numb inside a life that, when examined clearly, is full of things he cannot control or fix or escape from. When Homer is smart, the donuts stop tasting as good. He can see what they are for. And that clarity is so uncomfortable that he eventually chooses stupidity again, chooses the donut, chooses the numbness, because the alternative is sitting inside his own life with all the lights on. That is one of the darkest character moments in the history of American television, and the show presents it as a sweet, slightly sad ending with a warm musical sting. Homer puts the crayon back. He goes back to being Homer. The audience nods and the episode ends. But what just happened is a man making a conscious decision to diminish himself because consciousness is too painful. That is not a comedy beat. That is a portrait of depression. The beer deserves its own consideration. Homer drinks. The show has never been ambiguous about this. He drinks at Moe's every day after work. He drinks at home while watching television. He drinks at family events. He drinks alone when things go wrong. He drinks when things go right. The show treats his drinking the way it treats his eating, as a character trait, a running gag, something funny and harmless and essentially without consequence. But the show also, in its quieter moments, shows you what the drinking is doing to his relationships. Marge worries about it, though she rarely says so directly. The children have normalized it. Bart has grown up watching his father drink himself into a stupor on the couch and considers this ordinary. Lisa knows better, knows the statistics and the health implications and the psychological dimensions of dependence, but has learned not to say so, because saying so produces conflict, and conflict produces no results. Maggie watches from her bouncer and absorbs it all. There is an episode where Homer is warned that he may have a genetic predisposition to alcoholism. Rather than examining his relationship with drinking, he uses this as permission to drink more, framing it as something beyond his control. The episode plays this for laughs. But underneath the gag is something true about how people rationalize self-destructive patterns. Homer does not want to look at his drinking. The show does not make him. And so, the pattern continues, episode after episode, season after season, Moe's Tavern every evening, beer on the couch every night, the same routine, the same numbness. What is Homer numbing? Here is where the show gets genuinely complex. Homer's relationship with his own inner life is almost non-existent. He does not reflect, he does not process, he does not articulate his feelings in any meaningful way, not because he is stupid, or not only because of that, but because he was never given the tools. Abe Simpson, his father, was cold and critical and emotionally distant in the way that men of his generation were taught to be. The warmth in Homer's childhood came from his mother, and his mother was taken away when he was young. So Homer grew up in a house with a father who did not know how to love him and a void where his mother used to be, and he filled that void with whatever he could find. Food, beer, television, work when he had no choice, and eventually Marge. The way Homer loves Marge is the key to understanding everything about him. He loves her with an intensity that borders on panic. She is the thing he cannot lose. She is the proof that he is lovable, that someone chose him, that despite everything, someone looked at Homer Simpson and decided to stay. Every time the show puts their marriage under pressure, every time Marge is frustrated or considering leaving or simply exhausted by the weight of carrying the family on her own, Homer's response is not to grow or change or reflect. His response is desperation. It is the response of a child who knows what it feels like when the person who loves you disappears. The show returns to this again and again. Homer does something terrible and Marge threatens to leave. Homer panics and scrambles and makes gestures and grand promises. Sometimes it works, sometimes it barely works. But he never changes in any lasting way, because changing would require him to look at himself clearly, and Homer cannot do that. The crayon is still in his brain even when it is not. The numbness is structural. Let us talk about Homer's work life, because it is its own category of sadness that the show treats almost entirely as farce. Homer has worked at the Springfield nuclear power plant for the entirety of the show's run. He is a safety inspector, which means his job is to monitor the systems that keep a nuclear reactor from catastrophically failing and poisoning everyone within a 30-mile radius. He is spectacularly unqualified for this job. He sleeps at his workstation. He puts donuts in the reactor. He once taped a recording of himself saying yes on a loop so he could sleep through a safety meeting without anyone noticing. He has caused or nearly caused multiple nuclear incidents, all of which have been resolved through pure luck or the intervention of people more competent than him. The comedy of Homer's workplace incompetence is one of the show's most reliable sources of humor. But step back from the jokes for a moment and look at what Homer's professional life actually is. He is a man in his mid-30s who hates his job, who has always hated his job, who never wanted this job, was never suited for this job, and has spent the entirety of his working life doing it anyway because it pays enough to keep his family fed and housed, and because the alternative, the risk of leaving, the uncertainty of trying something else, is more frightening than the misery of staying. Homer has, in various episodes, demonstrated genuine capability in other areas. He is a talented cook when he tries. He has an ear for music. He is surprisingly good with animals. He is a genuinely creative problem solver when the problem is one he cares about. But none of these things pay a salary, and Homer has a mortgage and 3 children, so he puts on the hard hat and gets in the car and drives to the plant every morning in a kind of low-grade despair that he has dressed up as routine. There is an episode early in the show's run where Homer discovers, through a bureaucratic error, that he once had a dream job, working in a bowling alley, doing something he loved, and that he gave it up when he found out Marge was pregnant with Bart. He gave up his dream before he had even fully formed it. He was barely an adult. He sat in a bowling alley late at night and made the responsible choice and went to work at the power plant and has been there ever since. The episode is touching and genuinely sad in ways the comedy cannot fully cover. Homer looks at the bowling alley and sees the ghost of a version of himself that never got to exist, and the show asks you to feel tenderly toward him for making the sacrifice he made, and also, quietly, to feel the weight of what that sacrifice actually cost. He does not think about that version of himself often. He cannot afford to. Thinking about it would mean acknowledging the gap between the life he is living and the life he might have had, and Homer's entire psychological survival depends on not acknowledging that gap. He fills the gap with beer and donuts and television, and the occasional outburst that his brain cannot fully explain and his family has learned to absorb. This is why the Homer of the later seasons, the Homer who goes to space and becomes a food critic and joins a barbershop quartet and briefly moves to New York, reads as both fantasy and tragedy simultaneously. The show gives him adventures because his real life does not contain any. Every week, Homer Simpson has an experience that most people never have in their entire lives. And every week, by the end of the episode, he is back on the couch. Back to the plant on Monday. Back to Moe's on Tuesday. The adventures happen and disappear and leave nothing behind, which is maybe the show's most melancholy recurring structural choice. Homer's extraordinary week changes nothing. The couch absorbs it. The routine reclaims him. He sits down and opens a beer, and the show goes back to the way it was. And if you watch this pattern across 36 years, it starts to look less like episodic storytelling and more like a description of what hope does to people. It arrives, briefly, brightly, and then it is over and the couch is still there and Monday is still coming. There is a scene in the episode Lisa's Substitute that does not involve Homer very much, but it is one of the clearest pictures of Homer's inner life that the show has ever produced. Lisa's beloved substitute teacher, Mr. Bergstrom, is leaving Springfield. He is the first adult outside her family who has ever fully seen her, who has treated her intelligence with respect and her emotions with care. He is her intellectual first love. And when he says goodbye at the train station, she is devastated, and she asks him who she should call on when the world is hard and she needs someone. He gives her a note. She opens it on the walk home. It says, "You are Lisa Simpson." It is the most perfect piece of writing the show ever did, and it is in a B plot. The main plot of that episode involves Bart running for class president and losing, but the emotional weight is entirely in that note. Homer's version of that note does not exist. Nobody has ever handed Homer Simpson a piece of paper that said, "You are enough. You matter." The version of yourself that you are hiding inside all the food and beer and noise is worth knowing. Homer would not know what to do with that note if he received it. He would probably eat it. But the show knows he needs it. The show has always known. And the tragedy of Homer Simpson is that the one person in his family who might have given it to him, the mother who left when he was 6, never had the chance. There is something important to say about Homer's relationship with his children that often gets overlooked in discussions of the show. Homer is not a good father in any conventional sense. He is inattentive, self-absorbed, occasionally dangerous, and constitutionally unable to follow through on promises. He forgets school events. He gives advice that is actively harmful. He has endangered his children's lives through negligence more times than the show has bothered to count. He is, by any objective parenting standard, a disaster. And yet the children love him. All 3 of them. They love him with the particular ferocity of children who know that their parent is flawed and love them anyway. Bart's entire relationship with Homer is built on the dynamic of a boy who desperately wants his father's approval and a man who desperately wants his son's love, and both of them expressing it through conflict because neither of them knows how to express it any other way. Lisa has essentially given up on Homer as a source of intellectual or emotional guidance and found her nourishment elsewhere. But she loves him fiercely, chooses him fiercely, defends him to people who dismiss him, because she sees something in him that is easy to miss. She sees someone who is trying, someone who, despite everything, keeps trying. And Maggie. Maggie has never been asked to articulate what she feels about her father. She is 1 year old. But in the episode And Maggie Makes Three, there is a revelation about Homer that tells you everything you need to know. Homer, early in the show's backstory, had recently escaped the nuclear plant. He had worked his way into a job at the bowling alley he loved. He was happy, for the first time in as long as he could remember. And then Marge got pregnant with Maggie, and Homer had to go back to the plant, back to the job he hated, back to the life he was trying to leave. And he was so devastated that his boss, Mr. Burns, hung a motivational, demotivational plaque on Homer's workstation that said, "Don't forget, you're here forever." The audience laughs. It is a good joke, but at the end of the episode, the camera pulls back to reveal that Homer has covered the plaque with photographs of Maggie, positioned so that the letters that remain visible, the letters showing between the photographs, now read, "Do it for her." If you are watching that scene and not crying, you are doing something wrong. Homer did not transform his resentment of his situation into wisdom or grace or gratitude. He did something more human and more complicated than that. He covered the cruelty of it with the face of the person it was for. He looked at the reminder that he was trapped, and he put his daughter's face on top of it and said, "This is why." Not because he has resolved his feelings about his life, not because he has made peace with his choices, because she is there, and she is real, and loving her is the one thing that makes the plaque bearable to face every morning. That is not comedy. That is the emotional core of the entire show in a single image. And the show wrapped it in a gag and put it at the end of a B episode in season 6 and trusted the audience to find it. Most of us did. Homer Simpson is the funniest character in the history of American animation. He is also a portrait of a certain kind of man that America produces in great quantity and rarely looks at honestly. The man who loves his family and cannot communicate that love clearly. The man who knows, somewhere underneath everything, that his life has not turned out the way it was supposed to, and who has made his peace with that knowledge by refusing to look at it directly. The man who sits on the couch after a hard day and opens a beer and is quietly grateful for the couch and the beer and the woman in the kitchen and the children making noise upstairs, and who would never in 1,000 years be able to say that out loud. Homer says almost nothing out loud that matters. His depths are expressed in actions. The covered plaque, the return to the lane, the way he puts his hand on Marge's shoulder when he thinks no one is watching, the way he waits up when Bart is late, the way he stands outside Lisa's room sometimes, not going in, just listening to her play her saxophone, and you can see on his face that he understands, on some level that bypasses his damaged intelligence, that she is going to leave eventually, that she is going to become someone the town of Springfield cannot contain, and that he is going to miss her in a way he will never be able to explain. He is going to miss everything he already does. That is the architecture of his sadness. He lives inside a life he loves, surrounded by people he loves, and he misses them constantly because he cannot quite reach them. Because the distance between what he feels and what he can express is the distance the crayon made, and the radiation made, and Abe Simpson's coldness made, and the plant made, and Mona's absence made. The audience laughs at Homer. They always have. And somewhere in the laugh is the recognition that they know this man, that they have been this man, that the gap between what we feel and what we can say is one of the oldest human problems there is, and Homer Simpson carries it through every episode of this show with a kind of grace that looks, from the outside, like stupidity. Section 3. Marge's silent unraveling, the woman behind the patience. Marge Simpson has blue hair? This is a fact so familiar, so thoroughly absorbed into the visual grammar of American pop culture that most people stopped seeing it years ago. It is just Marge, the blue tower, the pearls, the green dress, the patient expression that never quite becomes a smile and never quite becomes a frown, hovering somewhere in the middle, absorbing everything. The blue hair is interesting, though. Marge did not always have blue hair. The color is dyed, which the show established early and then occasionally forgot and then re-established as needed. But the blue hair, the impossible vertical tower of it, the way it defies gravity and physics and any reasonable interpretation of what hair is for, the way it has remained exactly the same for 36 years without so much as a gray root, is one of the show's most persistent visual mysteries. What does it mean that Marge keeps her hair this way? Not just the color, but the height, the architecture of it, the way it requires maintenance and product and effort and still somehow always looks exactly the same? You do not keep hair like that by accident. You do not maintain that kind of structure casually. Marge's hair is the visible expression of the enormous amount of invisible effort she puts into keeping everything together. It is elaborate and controlled and immovable, and costs her something to maintain it, and nobody around her ever thinks to ask what it costs. That is Marge Simpson. Elaborate and controlled and immovable and costing something, and nobody around her ever thinking to ask. Let us be precise about what Marge gave up. Before she married Homer, before the children, before the green dress and the house on Evergreen Terrace, Marge had ambitions, not vague, undefined ones. She had a specific talent for art. The show has revisited this in multiple episodes across its run, always framing it as a surprise, a revelation, something that catches even Marge herself off guard. She paints a portrait of Homer, and it is extraordinary. She is invited to contribute to a gallery showing. She discovers repeatedly that she is genuinely gifted. And then, in each case, the gift is set aside. The gallery becomes complicated. The painting is sold and the opportunity closes. Life reasserts itself in the form of a family that needs feeding, and a husband who needs managing, and a house that needs tending. And Marge puts the brushes away and goes back to the kitchen, and the show moves on. The pattern is so consistent across so many episodes that it cannot be accidental. The show keeps giving Marge her dream back and then taking it away, not because the writers are cruel, but because this is what the show is documenting. This is what happened to a generation of women. This is what happens when you love your family, and your family has needs, and your own needs keep getting deferred and deferred and deferred until they become something you only visit occasionally, like a house you used to live in. There is a particular episode, Marge Gets a Job, where Marge begins working at the nuclear power plant. She is good at it. She is competent and organized and brings a warmth to the workplace that improves the dynamic almost immediately. Mr. Burns characteristically becomes infatuated with her. But the more interesting thing is what Marge herself experiences when she is working. She is energized. She is engaged. She has something that is hers, something outside the house. Something that measures her contribution in terms other than how clean the floor is and whether dinner is ready. Then Homer becomes jealous. Then the children need her. Then the situation becomes complicated by Burns's attentions and the workplace dynamic, and eventually Marge returns home, and the episode ends, and everyone is fine, and nothing is resolved, and nothing changes. This happens again in Marge vs. the monorail, in a sense, and in scenes from the class struggle in Springfield, where Marge discovers that she fits beautifully in a world of wealth and sophistication and culture, and then chooses her family over it. And the show presents this as the right choice, the loving choice, and it is. But it also costs her something that the show never quite reckons with directly. She chooses Homer and the kids and the house on Evergreen Terrace and the green dress over everything else, every time. And the show presents this as love, which it is. But it is also sacrifice, and sacrifice always has a price that somebody pays. Here is the thing about Marge that the show builds up to very slowly over many seasons and never quite arrives at explicitly. She is lonely. Not in the dramatic way. Not in a way that threatens the marriage or drives her toward anything dangerous. In the quiet, grinding, daily way. The way that does not announce itself or ask for attention or give you anything to point to. She is lonely in the way that people are lonely when they are surrounded by people who love them but who cannot quite reach them. Homer loves Marge. He loves her absolutely and completely, and in his limited, impaired, often selfish way, he is devoted to her. But he cannot talk to her. Not really. He cannot meet her where she lives, in the emotional and intellectual space where she actually exists. He can make her laugh, and he can hold her hand, and he can make her feel loved in the basic, physical, practical ways, but the conversations she needs to have, the real ones, the ones about who she is and what she wants and what she is afraid of and whether this is enough, those conversations do not happen because Homer cannot have them. He does not have the tools. And the children, As much as she loves them, are children. They take and take with the beautiful, unapologetic appetite of children, and they are supposed to. That is what children do. It is healthy and right. But it means that Marge is always giving, always providing, always being the one who holds the structure together, and the return on that investment, while real, is not the same as being known. The gambling episode, Springfield, is one of the clearest portraits of this. When the town gets a casino and Marge becomes addicted to gambling, the show frames it initially as a surprise, a character flaw emerging from nowhere. But the addiction makes complete psychological sense if you have been watching Marge carefully. At the slot machine, for the first time in as long as she can remember, she is somewhere that is entirely hers. The noise and light and mechanical certainty of the casino, the way every pull of the lever produces an immediate result, a response, a reaction, is so different from the endless deferred maintenance of her regular life that it is almost comprehensible as a form of relief. The casino does not need anything from her. It does not need dinner or help with homework or emotional management or the specific kind of patience that involves absorbing someone else's failure without making them feel bad about it. It just responds. Immediately. Completely. It sees her. Homer, of course, is oblivious to all of this. He is building a casino of his own. He does not notice that his wife is disappearing into a real one until the situation is already serious. And when he does notice, his response is characteristically Homer-shaped. He builds a scale model of the Taj Mahal in the basement so she can gamble at home, which is both sweet and completely wrong, and sort of sums up the entire dynamic of their marriage in a single gesture. He loves her. He misses the point of what she needs. He tries to fix the symptom instead of the cause. Marge accepts this because she always accepts this, and because the love is real even when the understanding is absent, and everything goes back to normal and the episode ends. The clown painting is worth spending some time on. In an early season of the show, Marge decides to repaint the house. She creates a painting to hang in the living room. It is an oil painting of a clown. The family hates it. Homer specifically hates it, describes it as disturbing and wrong, keeps having nightmares about it. The painting becomes a running gag, the creepy clown painting that haunts the Simpson household. But look at the painting itself. Look at what Marge created when she had an open canvas and the freedom to make something. She made a clown. Specifically, she made a clown that looks like it is suffering, a figure that is wearing the costume of happiness, performing it, and behind the performance, something else is visible to anyone who looks closely enough. The show does not call attention to this. It just puts the painting on the wall and lets it hang there in the background of scenes for seasons and seasons. This image of performed happiness over suppressed something else. In the home of a woman who has spent her entire married life performing patience and contentment and warmth, while something else, something harder to name, hangs in the background of her own interior landscape. The clown painting is not an accident. Marge painted what she knew. Let us talk about Marge's voice. Not the character's voice, the actual sound of it, the one produced by Julie Kavner and which has remained one of the most immediately recognizable sounds on American television for 36 years. It is low and slightly raspy and sounds like someone who has been talking all day and is slightly tired, but is going to keep talking anyway because there is more to say and no one else to say it. It sounds like love and exhaustion in roughly equal measure. It is the voice of someone who is always almost at the end of her rope and who will never let go of the rope. Julie Kavner has described the voice as coming from a real place, from a kind of emotional state rather than a performance choice. It is the voice of someone who is genuinely carrying something. And the show, season after season, gives Marge things to carry. She carries Homer's failures. She carries the children's crises. She carries the household, the finances when Homer's various schemes have depleted them, the social calendar, the medical appointments, the school communications, the birthday parties, the holiday preparation, the emotional tenor of the house, which rises and falls with her moods in ways that no one around her seems to fully register. There is a word for what Marge does in the Simpson household. It is called emotional labor, and it is the work of managing the feelings and relationships and interpersonal dynamics of a family or group, anticipating needs and preventing conflicts and smoothing over the inevitable rough spots. It is invisible work. It is exhausting work. And it is almost exclusively Marge's work. because Homer is constitutionally incapable of doing it, and the children are too young. The show never explicitly names what Marge does. It just shows it, episode after episode, the way she reads the room and adjusts, the way she notices that Homer is in a fragile mood and manages the children's expectations accordingly, the way she sees that Lisa is struggling before Lisa herself has articulated it and creates space for the conversation without making it feel like an intervention. The emotional intelligence on display in Marge's parenting is extraordinary, and the show renders it so naturally that it barely registers as a skill at all. It looks like instinct. It looks like just what Marge does. It is not instinct. It is a skill she developed because the alternative was chaos, because Homer's emotional management skills are essentially non-existent, because the family needed someone to perform this function and Marge stepped into the role so thoroughly that it became invisible. The episode that gets closest to the truth of Marge is Fear of Flying from season 6. In this episode, Marge discovers that she has an acute fear of flying. In trying to understand where the fear came from, she begins therapy. And in therapy, what emerges is a memory. A buried, suppressed memory of her father, who she has always believed was a flight attendant, and who turns out, upon examination, to have been something else entirely. The specific revelation of the episode is handled quickly, almost too quickly for the emotional weight of it. But the structure of the episode, the way it frames therapy as Marge finally having a conversation with someone who is actually listening, is one of the show's most honest portraits of what Marge needs and does not get in her regular life. Her therapist, voiced by Anne Bancroft in one of the show's most effective guest casting choices, asks Marge questions, simple, direct questions. Questions about how she feels and what she remembers and what she wants. And Marge does not know how to answer them at first. She is used to answering questions about what other people need. She is not used to being asked about herself. The fear of flying is a metaphor. This is not a subtle show in that way. The fear is of leaving the ground, of risking something, of trusting a mechanism that you cannot control. Marge is afraid to fly because she is afraid to leave. And she is afraid to leave because the life she has, the house and the family and the green dress and the pearls and the incredible tower of blue hair, is also a thing she needs, even when it exhausts her. Even when it does not give back what it takes. The episode ends without fully resolving the therapy arc. Marge makes progress, but the show moves on before the work is done, as it usually does. The insight floats there for a moment and then the credits roll, and next week everything is reset and Marge is back in the kitchen being patient and the moment passes. But it was real while it lasted. It always is. Marge has had, across the run of the show, several distinct moments where the patient facade breaks and something underneath comes through. The breakdown during the hurricane. The gambling spiral. The moment in Secrets of a Successful Marriage where Homer, in a fit of panic, reveals all of Marge's private secrets to a marriage counseling group, and she is so humiliated and so genuinely hurt that she tells him to leave the house. Not in the performative, temporary way. She means it. She needs him to go. In that episode, Homer has to do something the show rarely asks him to do. He has to sit with the consequence of his behavior. He has to understand, at least partially, that Marge is not infinitely elastic, that she can be hurt, that she has limits, and he has to find a way to ask for forgiveness that is real rather than reflexive. He does, and she lets him back in. And the show moves on, but the moment lingers. The moment where Marge, standing in the doorway of the house that she has given her life to maintaining, tells her husband to leave it, is one of the most honest moments of emotional reality the show has ever produced. She is not performing patience in that moment. She is not absorbing and managing and soothing. She is standing in her own doorway and saying, "Enough. This is my home too." And what you just did is not forgivable with a gesture and a speech. This is going to cost you something. It does cost him something. And then he pays, and she forgives, and the balance tips back to where it usually sits. Marge carrying slightly more than her share, and Homer carrying slightly less, and both of them loving each other in the crooked, imperfect, deeply human way that the show has been documenting for 36 years. There is a version of Marge Simpson's story that nobody on the show ever tells directly, but which the details accumulate to reveal across hundreds of episodes. It is the story of a woman of genuine intelligence and artistic talent and emotional depth who grew up in a particular time, in a particular town, and made the choices that the time and the town suggested she should make. She married young, she had children, she subordinated her ambitions to the project of the family and found that project genuinely meaningful, genuinely loving, genuinely worth doing. She is not a woman who regrets her choices in any simple or dramatic sense, but she is also a woman who knows, somewhere that she does not often visit, that the person she is inside the marriage and the person she might have been outside it are not the same person. And the distance between those two people is not something she talks about, because there is no one to talk to who would understand it, and because naming it would make it more real, and because the family needs her to be the person she is rather than the person she might have been, and because love, real love, the kind she feels for Homer and Bart and Lisa and Maggie, does not require you to be all of yourself in order to be real. She just keeps the hair up. She keeps the pearls on. She stands in the kitchen and she absorbs the noise and the chaos and the constant, low-grade entropy of the family she has made. And occasionally, when nobody is watching, she picks up a paintbrush. Section 4. Bart Simpson and the Portrait of a Child the System Failed. Bart Simpson is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. And in all that time, across hundreds of episodes, the show has never resolved the central question his character poses. Is Bart a bad kid, or is Bart a good kid in a situation that keeps producing bad outcomes? The show's answer, repeated in various forms over its entire run, is the second one. Bart is not a bad kid. The show makes this explicit in a number of its most emotional episodes, moments where the comedy strips away and you see Bart clearly as a child who is bright and funny and loyal and desperately, urgently in need of something that the adults in his life consistently fail to give him. But the comedy format also requires Bart to be the troublemaker. He is the it of the show, the principal of chaos, the 10-year-old who spray paints and skateboards and makes prank calls to Moe's Tavern and refers to his father by his first name. That Bart is a vehicle for jokes. The other Bart, the one who lives underneath the jokes, is the subject of some of the most painfully honest child psychology ever produced in an animated series. Let us start with what is actually wrong with Bart. The show has, over the years, suggested several possibilities. He has been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder in various episodes. His reading and writing difficulties suggest potential dyslexia that was never properly identified or supported. His behavior in classroom settings, the constant disruption, the inability to focus, the tendency to act out precisely when the situation calls for stillness, reads less like malice and more like a child who has not been given the tools to manage an environment that was not designed for the way his brain works. Springfield Elementary has never been equipped to help Bart. The school, which we will examine in detail in a later section, is underfunded and overwhelmed and staffed by adults who have largely given up on the project of education and are now merely executing it mechanically. For a child who needs engagement, who needs challenge, who needs an adult to look at him and see the intelligence underneath the disruption and say, "I see you, I know you are in there, let me help you find a way to learn that works for you," Springfield Elementary has nothing to offer, so Bart fails. Not because he is stupid, he is demonstrably not stupid. He has intuitive social intelligence, a quick wit, genuine creativity, and a capacity for strategic thinking that the show often deploys in comic contexts but which, in any other environment, would be recognized as gifts. He fails because the environment and his brain are mismatched, and nobody responsible for fixing that mismatch has enough resources or enough attention to actually fix it. Bart Gets an F is the second episode of the 4th season, which also makes it one of the most watched episodes in the show's history, airing during the period when The Simpsons was the biggest show on television. It is an episode about Bart failing a test, specifically about Bart facing the possibility of having to repeat the 4th grade. The comedy is there. There are jokes about Bart's study habits, jokes about prayer, a subplot about a blizzard that gives Bart a snow day to avoid studying. But the emotional center of the episode is a sequence near the end that the show handles with almost no comic relief at all. Bart has studied. For the first time in his school career, he has genuinely tried. He has stayed up late and concentrated and done the work. He sits down to take the test, and he writes, and he answers, and he finishes, and he is certain, or almost certain, that this time, finally, it will be enough. He fails. Not by a lot, by 2 points. 2 points short of passing. He has come farther than he has ever come before, and it is still not enough, and he puts his head down on the desk and cries. It is one of the most genuinely upsetting moments in the show's history because it is so completely real. It is the experience of a child who has been told that effort is what matters, that if you try, you can succeed, and who has tried and who has discovered that the gap between where they are and where they need to be is larger than effort alone can close. Bart is not stupid, but he has fallen so far behind, has been so inadequately supported for so long, that even a genuine effort cannot make up the difference in a single test. When Mrs. Krabappel sees him crying, she does something that the show frames quietly and without fanfare. She looks at the paper. She sees that it is genuinely better. She sees that something happened in this boy, something changed, something real was attempted. She gives him an extra point for accurately describing why he failed in a historical context on the test, a creative interpretation of one of his answers, and it is enough. He passes. It is a 2-point act of grace, a teacher noticing a child who is trying, a teacher deciding that the effort is worth acknowledging even when the result is technically below the threshold. The moment is warm and funny because of how it happens, Bart bursting into tears of relief, shouting about how he actually learned something and hugging Mrs. Krabappel in disbelief. But underneath the warmth is something difficult. This child's educational fate depended on a single teacher's decision to look at him generously on a single day. If Mrs. Krabappel had been having a worse day, if she had graded the paper without looking closely, if Bart had missed by 3 points instead of 2, everything could have gone the other way, and the show knows it, and the relief you feel at the ending is precisely proportional to the precariousness of the system that produced it. Bart's relationship with Homer is the most emotionally complex father-son relationship in the history of American animation, and possibly in the history of American television. They are profoundly similar people. The show knows this and uses it. Both of them are impulsive and emotional, and constitutionally unable to think before acting. Both of them love people ferociously and show it in ways that cause damage. Both of them have quick tempers that they cannot fully control and feel genuine remorse afterward without being able to stop the next outburst from happening. Both of them are funny, almost despite themselves, in ways that are inseparable from their pain. Homer strangles Bart. This is one of the show's oldest running gags. Bart does something outrageous and Homer grabs him by the throat and shakes him. The audience laughs. It is a gag. But consider what the gag is depicting. A large adult man physically assaulting a small child repeatedly as a response to frustration he cannot manage any other way. The show does not examine this. The show does not acknowledge it as violence in any meaningful way. It is just Homer and Bart being Homer and Bart. In the real world, what Homer does to Bart would be considered abuse. In Springfield, it is a character trait. And the fact that both things are true simultaneously, that it is also genuinely funny, and that Homer is also genuinely loving, that Bart laughs it off and comes back, and that their relationship contains real tenderness alongside the violence, is one of the show's most uncomfortable tonal achievements. Because this dynamic, too, is real. Plenty of children have grown up with fathers who could not control their anger, who expressed love and expressed frustration through the same physical register, who were genuinely trying and genuinely failing, and whom the children loved anyway, with the complicated love of people who have no other option. The Simpsons renders this without comment. The choking is a joke. But the shape of the relationship underneath the joke is recognizable to a lot of people. The episode Bart Sells His Soul is, many critics argue, the single most emotionally sophisticated episode in the show's history. It is certainly one of the most theologically ambitious pieces of television ever produced for a mainstream animated audience, which is a remarkable thing to be able to say about a joke cartoon from 1995. The premise is simple. Bart, dismissing the concept of the soul as superstitious nonsense, sells his soul to Milhouse for $5. The soul is represented as a piece of paper with Bart's name on it, which Milhouse eventually sells to a comic book store, and Bart spends the episode trying to get it back. The comedy is in the specifics. Bart's certainty that he has made a rational trade, the escalating absurdity of what the soul changes about his daily experience. Animals no longer respond to him. The automatic door at the Quickie Mart does not open when he approaches, because, the show implies, the sensor responds to something in people that Bart no longer has. He cannot laugh spontaneously. He cannot feel the things that used to feel good. He breathes on a cold window and the fog does not appear. And he has a dream. In the dream, all the children on the boats on the foggy river are with their souls, the souls appearing as miniature versions of themselves. Bart is alone. He rows through the fog calling for his soul, and it does not come. He wakes up crying. The show is doing something extraordinary in this episode. It is using a 10-year-old boy's theology lesson to examine the question of what it feels like to lose the capacity for wonder, for genuine response, for the sense that you are connected to something larger than your own body and its appetites. Bart sold his soul as a transaction, and what the transaction revealed is that the soul is not a superstition. It is the thing that makes experience meaningful. It is the difference between going through the motions and actually being present inside your life. Bart gets his soul back at the end. Lisa buys it back for him. But the details of how she got it, she spent her own savings, she prayed, she did not tell Bart she was going to do it, she just did it because she knew he needed it, are delivered without fanfare or sentimentality. She hands him the piece of paper. He reads his name on it. He cries. He holds it against his chest. And then the last scene shows Bart lying in bed with his soul paper tucked under his pillow. And in the dark of his room, he says a prayer. Simple, halting, uncertain. Bart, who has spent the entire episode insisting that souls are not real, is praying because something changed. Because he was without the thing that makes the world feel full, and he came back to it, and now it feels fragile in a way it did not before. That is not a joke. That is one of the most genuine depictions of spiritual experience in the history of American television, wrapped inside a joke cartoon about a 10-year-old selling his soul to his friend for $5. The show has been honest, across its run, about the ways that Bart is let down by the adults who are supposed to take care of him. Not just Homer. The school has failed him. The social environment of Springfield, which rewards stupidity and punishes depth, has failed him. Even Marge, who loves him unconditionally, cannot reach the part of Bart that is genuinely in trouble because she is too busy managing everything else. The result is a 10-year-old boy who has learned to survive rather than thrive, who has learned to perform the bad behavior that gets him attention rather than the vulnerability that might get him help, who has learned that adults respond to pranks and disruption but not to need, because need makes them uncomfortable and they do not know what to do with it. Bart's pranks are not malice. They are communication. They are a boy saying, I am here. I am struggling. Someone please notice me enough to respond, even if the response is punishment. Because punishment at least confirms that I exist and that what I do has consequences and that someone is paying attention. The show treats the pranks as funny, which they are. But underneath every prank is a child who learned that the only way to be seen is to misbehave. And the tragedy of that is something the show has never resolved because Bart is still 10 years old. And the system that failed him is still the system he lives in, and nothing has changed. And the skateboard keeps appearing in the opening credits, and the audience keeps laughing. There is one more thing about Bart that deserves to be said. He is funny. Genuinely, innately, spontaneously funny. Not in the mean-spirited, punchline at someone's expense way, though he does that too. In the way that some people are just funny, where the angle they see things from produces observations that hit at exactly the right moment and the delivery is perfect and the timing is impossible to teach, Bart has that. The show gives him that. And this matters because it is also a survival tool. Bart uses humor the way Homer uses food and beer, as a way of managing the emotional reality of his life by converting it into something else. Something that gets laughs and diffuses tension and makes people like him and keeps the harder feelings at a distance. He is very good at this. He has had to be. He has been doing it since he was old enough to understand that making people laugh is safer than asking them for what he actually needs. That is not a joke, but it will produce jokes for as long as Bart Simpson is 10 years old on the couch in Springfield, and the audience will keep laughing, and somewhere underneath the laughing, if you are paying attention, you can hear a 10-year-old boy asking a question that nobody in his life has ever quite known how to answer. Section 5. Lisa and the loneliest intelligence in television history. Lisa Simpson is 8 years old. She plays the saxophone. She is a Buddhist. She is a feminist. She is an environmentalist, a vegetarian, a straight-A student who reads Hemingway for fun and has wept over the beauty of a mathematical proof, and once spent an entire summer reading every book in the Springfield library, not because anyone asked her to, but because the books were there, and she had a hunger that food could not touch. She is also profoundly, constitutionally, almost cosmically alone. Not just because she is smarter than the people around her, though she is. Not just because her values set her apart from a community built on apathy and convenience, though they do. Lisa Simpson is alone in a particular way that has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with the specific longing of a person who feels everything too much in a world that asks you to feel things only the appropriate amount. The show has understood this about her since the beginning. One of the earliest and most resonant episodes involving Lisa is Moaning Lisa from the first season, where she falls into a depression so thorough and so without obvious cause that even Marge does not know what to do with it. Lisa is sad. Not sad about anything in particular. Sad in the way that some people are sad, as a kind of default relationship to the world. Sad in the way that suggests a nervous system calibrated differently from the people around her, receiving at a frequency that produces more signal and more noise and requires more effort to manage. Marge's response to Lisa's depression is instructive. She tells Lisa to smile. Not to feel better, to perform better, to show the appropriate face to the world rather than the real one. It is advice born of love and also completely wrong, and the show knows it is wrong. And the moment when Marge takes the advice back, when she finds Lisa playing saxophone with a jazz musician named Bleeding Gums Murphy and realizes that her daughter has found something real and that she was trying to cover it up, is one of the first moments in the show's history where the emotional register shifts and you understand that this cartoon is going to be honest. Marge tells Lisa that she can feel whatever she actually feels, that the feelings do not have to be managed for the comfort of people who are not ready for them. It is the most important thing Marge ever says to her daughter, and the show places it in the first season in the 14th episode, before most viewers knew what kind of show they were watching. It is a promise the show made early and has spent 36 seasons trying to keep. The loneliness is most visible in the episode Summer of 4 Feet 2. The family goes to Flanders' beach house for the summer. Lisa, desperate to escape the social structure of Springfield where she is known and categorized and dismissed, decides to reinvent herself. She leaves the books at home. She adopts a different style, casual and unconcerned, the kind of effortless cool she has always watched other kids perform and never been able to join. And it works. She makes friends. Real friends, or what feel like real friends. Kids who like her for something other than her grades, who want to spend time with her without an agenda. For a few weeks, Lisa Simpson is just a girl at the beach. And then Bart, being Bart, shows them her yearbook. Shows them the real Lisa, the Lisa from Springfield, the achievements and the awards, and the academic record that proves she is not who she has been pretending to be. And for a moment, the whole thing falls apart in her hands. Except it does not. The friends do not leave. They do something the show has rarely allowed the people in Lisa's life to do. They tell her that they knew, that they had figured it out, that the smart part of her was not as hidden as she thought, that it came through in everything she said, and that they liked her anyway. Because of it even. Because intelligence is not the problem. Being too frightened to be intelligent is the problem. Lisa learns something from this that the show tries to give her as often as it can, and that her life in Springfield keeps taking back. She learns that the thing she is trying to hide is also the thing worth keeping. That authenticity, the genuine, undefended version of herself, is not a liability. It is the point. She cannot hold on to this lesson in Springfield. Springfield will not let her. Springfield is a town that has, as we have discussed, made the suppression of uncomfortable truths into a civic religion. Lisa is the show's walking uncomfortable truth. She is the character who says the thing nobody wants to hear, who sees the thing nobody wants to see, who refuses to normalize the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the slow, grinding unfairness of a world organized to benefit the powerful and absorb everyone else. She cannot win in Springfield. The show keeps trying to give her victories, and Springfield keeps absorbing them. But it keeps giving her the victories anyway, because Lisa is what the show believes in, even when it cannot quite make that belief pay off within its own fictional universe. Lisa's Substitute is the episode that best captures what Lisa needs and almost never gets. Mr. Bergstrom is a substitute teacher who arrives while Mrs. Hoover is sick. He is extraordinary. He is engaged and funny and genuinely curious about his students, and he actually sees them, as individuals with particular intelligences and particular needs. He sees Lisa. He calls on her. He takes her seriously. He pushes back when she is right but slightly incomplete. He suggests books she has not read and asks her what she thinks and listens to the answer. Lisa falls in love with him in the way that children fall in love with teachers who change their lives. Not romantic love, though the show plays with the comedic surface of that for a moment. The love of someone who has been living on bread and water and has just been given a real meal. The love of recognition. Mr. Bergstrom leaves at the end of the episode. He is a substitute. That is what substitutes do. He tells Lisa that what she found in his class, the sense that her mind is worth engaging, the pleasure of intellectual challenge, the feeling of being genuinely seen by another person, is available to her anywhere. That she carries it. That she does not need him or a teacher like him to keep it alive. He is right. And he is also, in a practical sense, completely wrong. Because Lisa goes back to Mrs. Hoover's class and Mrs. Hoover resumes the work of teaching as a kind of bureaucratic endurance test, and nothing changes, and the school that failed Bart in one way fails Lisa in a different way, through indifference rather than hostility, and Lisa survives on her own resources because she always has. But she remembers Mr. Bergstrom. The show tells us she does. The note he gives her, the one that says, "You are Lisa Simpson," is a talisman she carries. The memory of being seen once by someone who knew how to see her is a thing she returns to. That is what the show understands about lonely intelligence. It is not the loneliness of having no one around you. It is the loneliness of having people around you and still not being reached by them. Lisa is surrounded by her family, by classmates, by a whole town of people, and she is alone in the way that light is alone when there is no surface to land on. Her light goes out and out and out, and mostly it passes through the people around her without catching. Mr. Bergstrom caught it, briefly. And that brief catching was enough to sustain her for years, which tells you something both beautiful and heartbreaking about how little it takes to matter to a child who is not getting enough. Lisa's Buddhism deserves more attention than it usually receives in discussions of the show. She converts to Buddhism in season 13, in an episode where she finds the precepts of Buddhist thought more emotionally satisfying than the Christian framework she was raised in. The show treats this conversion seriously, more seriously than it treats most of Lisa's intellectual and spiritual phases. She does not unconvert. She remains Buddhist for the rest of the series. What Buddhism offers Lisa, specifically, is a framework for sitting with difficulty without being destroyed by it. The Buddhist emphasis on the nature of suffering, on impermanence, on the cultivation of equanimity in the face of things you cannot change, is precisely what Lisa needs in a life that is full of things she cannot change and that cause her genuine pain. Her father will not improve. Her brother will not settle down. Her school will not get better. Springfield will not clean up its air and water, and political corruption. These are facts. They will not change. And Lisa needs a way to love the people inside these facts without requiring the facts to be different before she can function. Buddhism gives her that. It gives her permission to feel the grief of what is, without being required to fix it or suppress it or perform something other than what it actually is. And the show, by giving this framework to its most emotionally honest character, is saying something about what wisdom looks like when intelligence alone is not enough. Intelligence tells you what is wrong. Wisdom tells you how to keep living in the presence of what is wrong. Lisa has the intelligence. The Buddhism is the beginning of the wisdom. It is the show acknowledging, in season 13, that knowing the truth is not the same as knowing what to do with the truth. Lisa Simpson is, I would argue, the show's conscience. Not its heart, that is Marge. Not its id, that is Bart. Not its grief, which is Homer, but its conscience. The part of the show that looks at Springfield and says, "This is wrong. This is unjust. Someone should say so." She says so constantly. Episode after episode, she looks at the thing everyone else is accepting and she refuses to accept it. She writes the letters and raises the objections and makes the arguments and gets ignored and tries again. She is 8 years old, and she is doing the work of someone who has decided that complicity is not an option, that the discomfort of speaking up is preferable to the discomfort of staying silent. She does not win. Not often. not in the lasting, structural way that would actually change things. The episode ends and Springfield resets, and whatever injustice she challenged reasserts itself next week. But she keeps trying, and the show honors that persistence even when it cannot reward it, which is itself a kind of honesty. Because in the real world, the people who speak up against injustice often do not win either. Not quickly, not visibly, not in ways that feel commensurate with the effort. And the show is honest about that, through Lisa, in a way that most optimistic American storytelling refuses to be. Lisa is 8 years old, and she is the bravest character in Springfield. She is brave not because she is not afraid, but because she goes ahead anyway. Because the alternative, the version of herself that stopped caring and stopped speaking, is a version she refuses to become. Even when it would be easier. Even when nobody is listening. Even when Springfield, as it so often does, responds to her truth with silence or ridicule, or the cheerful, damage-insulated amnesia that is the town's primary defense mechanism. She keeps playing her saxophone. She keeps reading. She keeps raising her hand in class even when the class does not want to hear what she has to say. She is 8 years old, and she will always be 8 years old, and the world is a better place because she keeps trying, even in a cartoon, even in a show that cannot ultimately give her what she deserves. Section 6. The Marriage at the Center of Everything. Homer and Marge Simpson have been married for 36 years in television time, and somewhere between 10 and 20 years in the show's internal chronology, which keeps shifting to accommodate the floating timeline. They have been married across more episodes, more seasons, more cultural moments than any other fictional couple in American television history. Their marriage is the structural spine of the show. Everything else, the children's stories and the Springfield plots, and the celebrity cameos and the social satire, exists in orbit around this central relationship. Homer and Marge's marriage is the reason the show holds together. It is also, if you examine it honestly, one of the most complicated and quietly troubling depictions of a long marriage that American popular culture has ever produced. They love each other. This is unambiguous. The show has never wavered on this point. Homer loves Marge with a devotion that is almost pathological in its completeness. She is his anchor, his proof, his daily confirmation that life is worth the effort of getting up. Marge loves Homer with the patient, long-suffering, genuinely warm love of someone who has made her peace with a person's limitations and found something irreplaceable inside them anyway. But love is not enough to sustain a marriage, or at least love alone cannot do all the work that a marriage requires. And the Homer and Marge relationship, examined across its 36-year run, is a catalog of the specific ways that love without communication, love without growth, love without the constant, effortful project of actually understanding another person can sustain a marriage structurally while leaving both people inside it quietly incomplete. The central dynamic is simple to describe and almost impossible to resolve. Homer needs Marge absolutely, and this need prevents him from treating her as a separate person with her own needs. He loves her so much that he cannot quite see her clearly. He sees what she is to him, the stability, the warmth, the unconditional acceptance, and he struggles to see what she is to herself. This is a particular kind of love that is very common and very easy to mistake for the deepest kind, because it is accompanied by such genuine feeling. Homer would do anything for Marge. He has proved this repeatedly. He has faced danger and humiliation and his own worst impulses for her sake. But the anything he would do is always defined by what he perceives she needs, and what he perceives she needs is usually what would reassure him that she is still there, still his, still the center of the life he has built. He rarely asks what she actually needs. He rarely sits with the question of who she is when she is not being his wife. And this, more than any of the disasters or the mistakes or the obliviousness, is the deepest problem in their marriage. The episode Secrets of a Successful Marriage is one of the most honest episodes the show has ever produced about this dynamic, and it is framed almost entirely as a comedy. Homer begins teaching a class on marriage at a community education center. He has no qualifications for this. He is doing it for the $35 stipend. And when he runs out of things to say in the first session, he begins sharing intimate details of his marriage with the class. Details that Marge told him in confidence. Details about her fears and insecurities and the private workings of their relationship that were never meant to leave the bedroom. Marge finds out. She is devastated, and she tells him to leave. The comedy is in Homer's panic, in his ridiculous attempts to win her back, in the way he sleeps at Moe's and mopes and eventually gives a speech that is both absurd and, somehow, exactly right. He tells her that he gave away her secrets because it was the only interesting thing he had to offer the class, that the inside of their marriage was the only thing he had that was worth sharing, that the most valuable thing in his life was what he knows about her. It is a terrible answer that is also a kind of truth. Homer violated Marge's trust not from malice but from the poverty of his own self. He had nothing else to give. He took the most precious thing he had access to and spent it because it was all he had. Marge lets him back in. The show moves on, but the episode has said something real. Homer's love for Marge is so consuming that it can become a cage. His dependence on her is so absolute that it can become a demand. He loves her and he takes her. Both things are true, simultaneously. And Marge, who loves him with open eyes, who knows exactly what he is and chooses him anyway, lives inside both truths every day. The show has put the marriage under direct threat many times. Marge has come close to leaving in several episodes. Homer has come close to falling for other people in a handful of storylines. And every time, the marriage pulls back from the edge and reasserts itself and continues. What is notable is not the threats, but the resolution. The marriage survives not because Homer and Marge resolve their fundamental incompatibilities, but because they choose each other across those incompatibilities. Over and over, in small and large ways, they choose the marriage. Not because it is perfect or even particularly functional in the rational sense, but because it is theirs. Because they made it and they live in it, and walking away from it would be walking away from the version of themselves that it contains. This is what long marriages look like. The real ones that survive not on magic but on choice. The daily, unglamorous, sometimes grinding choice to continue. To stay in the room. To have the conversation. To absorb the disappointment and try again tomorrow. Homer and Marge's marriage is the show's thesis about what love actually is in practice. Not the feeling, which is easy. The practice, which is everything. There is an image from the episode And Maggie Makes Three that captures the whole marriage in a single shot. Homer and Marge are at the restaurant where Homer proposed to her. They are there because Homer has something important to tell her. He tells her about the bowling alley job, about how happy he was, about what he gave up when they got pregnant unexpectedly for the third time. Marge is already holding back tears before he finishes. Because she knows. She has always known what it cost him. She carried that knowledge for years without being asked to and without putting it down. And when Homer finishes his story, she asks him if he resents Maggie. If he wishes things had been different. Homer says no. He says it simply. He says Maggie is why everything is worth it. And the way he says it, without performance, without the usual buffoonery, just directly, just honestly, with his whole limited heart, is one of the most devastating things the show has ever produced. Marge reaches across the table and takes his hand. They have been married for years in this moment. They have been through everything the show has put them through. They are sitting in the restaurant where he proposed, in the life they made together out of sacrifice and compromise, and the particular love of two people who chose each other when they could have chosen differently, and they are holding hands across a table, and the show lets the moment breathe for just a second before the comedy reasserts itself. That second is the whole marriage. That second is why the show matters. Section 7. Grandpa Simpson and the Violence of Being Forgotten. Abe Simpson is the show's ghost. He has been a ghost since the first episode, shuffled off to the Springfield retirement castle while the family carries on without him, present just often enough to remind you that he exists and forgotten just often enough to remind you that the show is also documenting something about what America does with its old people. Let us be direct about what the Springfield retirement castle is. It is a warehouse for the elderly. The show has been honest about this from the moment it introduced the location. The castle is underfunded and understaffed and smells like disinfectant and institutional cooking, and the people inside it are there largely because nobody outside wanted them enough to keep them. They are not dangerous. They are not incapable. They are simply old, which in Springfield, as in America, is a category that produces rapid social invisibility. Abe is in the castle not because Homer is a bad son, exactly, but because Homer is a negligent one. He does not visit enough. He does not call enough. He does not think about his father's loneliness or his father's history, or the fact that the man sitting in the institutional chair watching institutional television was once a young man who had a life and ambitions and a story of his own that nobody in Springfield is interested in anymore. The show handles Abe's situation almost exclusively through comedy. His rambling stories that go nowhere, his references to events and people that nobody remembers, his tendency to fall asleep mid-sentence, his confusion about contemporary technology, these are funny. They are also, quietly and deliberately, the comedy of erasure. Abe is funny the way the invisible are funny, by being so thoroughly present in their absence that the audience must choose between laughing and feeling the discomfort of what the laughter is covering. The most important thing about Abe Simpson is that he was young once. This sounds obvious. It is not. The show has to keep reminding you of it because the character as he exists in the present tense is so completely stripped of his history that it is easy to forget he had one. He was young during World War II. He served. The show has depicted his wartime experiences in several episodes, always with a mixture of comedy and genuine darkness. Abe was in combat. He saw things. He did things. He came home from the war to a country that wanted to put the war behind it quickly, to rebuild and grow and consume and forget, and he built a life in that country and raised a family and watched his son grow into a man who has the same fundamental emotional architecture as he does, but expressed in completely different ways because of the completely different world he grew up in. The show has occasionally given Abe genuinely heroic backstory. He was part of a small group of World War II veterans who were awarded a special recognition. He had relationships and adventures and made choices that shaped history, in small and local ways that nonetheless mattered to the people involved. He was a person. He was full. And then time passed and he became the old man in the retirement home. The same person, but invisible now, because the culture decided that his time was finished. The stories that made him vital are now the rambling non sequiturs that make everyone leave the room. The show does not moralize about this. It does not deliver a speech about the importance of listening to your elders or honoring the sacrifices of the previous generation. It just shows you Abe in his chair, telling his story to whoever has not left yet, and it trusts you to feel the weight of what you are watching. Homer's relationship with his father is one of the show's most sustained and least examined emotional through lines. Homer is a neglectful son. This is simply true. He visits Abe infrequently and usually under duress. He does not seek out his father's company. He finds his father embarrassing in the way that children find aging parents embarrassing, which is a kind of cruelty that is so common it barely registers as cruelty at all. But Homer's neglect of his father is not simple. It is not straightforward indifference. The show, in its more honest moments, suggests that Homer finds his father difficult to be around because his father is a mirror he does not want to look into. Abe is what Homer might become. Abandoned by the people he loves, warehoused, visible only when inconvenient. Homer, who has built his entire psychological survival on the certainty that his family will not leave him, cannot sit comfortably with the image of his own father being left. So he stays away. He gives Abe the minimum. He collects the guilt of it and uses more beer and more food to cover it and tries not to think about it too directly. And Abe waits in his chair and tells his stories to whoever will listen, and is funny and strange and occasionally wise, and mostly just old and alone, in the way that the show has always been honest enough to show without being comfortable, enough to resolve. There is an episode, Old Money, where Grandpa falls in love with a woman named Bee at the retirement home. She is warm and interested and she sees him clearly, sees the person underneath the old man in the way that good love always does. They have a brief, sweet romance, and then Bee dies. She leaves Abe her life savings, and the episode becomes about what Abe chooses to do with the money. The comedy is in the various family members trying to extract the money for their own purposes, but the emotional center is Abe sitting with the money and sitting with the grief and deciding that the best thing he can do with the gift Bee gave him is use it to improve the retirement home, to make the place where he and she spent their last time together a slightly better place for the people left behind. It is a quiet, dignified conclusion for an episode that could have been entirely a farce. Abe makes a genuinely altruistic choice. He grieves and he acts from the grief in a way that is constructive and generous. He is not the senile, rambling comedy figure in this episode. He is a man who loved someone and lost them, and found a way to honor the love by caring for the community they shared. The show gives Abe this moment and then takes it back by the next episode, because the floating timeline does not carry grief forward. B is not mentioned again. Abe returns to his chair and his stories and his invisibility. But old money is evidence that the show knows who Abe Simpson is underneath the comedy. It knows what it is depicting when it puts him in that chair. And occasionally, very occasionally, it chooses to show you the person rather than the gag. Abe's relationship with Homer's children is another area where the show does something quietly honest. He loves his grandchildren in the uncomplicated, unburdened way that grandparents often love their grandchildren. Without the anxiety of parenting, without the need to be right, without the weight of the ongoing relational history that complicates everything between parents and children, he tells Bart his stories. Bart, who cannot sit still in school for 5 minutes, will sometimes sit with Abe and listen. There is a connection there, across 70 years, between the boy who cannot fit the world he is in and the old man who has been made to feel that the world has moved past him. They are both displaced. They both know what it feels like to be in a room and not quite be counted among the people the room is really for. The show does not make much of this. It does not need to. The moments between Bart and Grandpa are quiet and occasional and real, in the way that the show's most honest moments are always real. Without fanfare, without being underlined or framed for emotional impact, just there, in the flow of the show, for the audience that is paying attention. What the show is saying, through Abe, through the Springfield retirement castle, through Homer's neglect and the town's indifference, is something about the cost of a culture organized entirely around the productive, the vital, the currently useful. Abe is not currently useful. He cannot contribute to the economy or the social fabric in the ways that Springfield values. He is not funny or entertaining or convenient. He is old, and his stories are long, and the room empties when he starts to tell them. But the stories are real. The history is real. The person telling them is real. And the show, by making Abe one of its central recurring figures rather than a background extra, is insisting on that reality, even when it is also making him the punchline. That insistence, gentle and persistent and never quite triumphant, is its own kind of compassion. It is the show saying, he was here, he is still here. He matters even when we act like he does not. Remember him. Section 8. Springfield Elementary and the Machinery of Failure. Springfield Elementary School has been failing its students since the first episode. This is not an accusation. This is the show's explicit, consistent, regularly documented position on its own fictional institution. The school has inadequate funding, aging infrastructure, a demoralized faculty, and a principal whose grip on his own identity is, as we have discussed in detail elsewhere, genuinely tenuous. But the school is also more than a target for satire. The way the show depicts Springfield Elementary, across hundreds of episodes, is one of the most sustained portraits of institutional failure in American popular culture. The school is not failing because of bad people. It is failing because of a system that has decided, through 1,000 small policy choices and funding decisions and the general cultural indifference to anything that cannot immediately prove its economic utility, that the children inside it are not worth the investment required to actually educate them. Principal Skinner, or Armin Tamzarian, or whoever he actually is a tragic figure when the comedy strips away. The show is most honest about Skinner in his moments with Mrs. Krabappel, the fourth-grade teacher who has given her career to Springfield Elementary and received almost nothing back. Their relationship, which is primarily expressed through professional antagonism and the occasional moment of genuine connection, is one of the show's most realistic adult relationships, in the sense that it is built on shared circumstance rather than choice. Skinner and Krabappel are both trapped. Skinner is the principal of a school he never intended to run, living an identity that was assigned to him by circumstance and then legally enforced. Krabappel is a teacher who was probably once genuinely enthusiastic about the project of education and who has been ground down by decades of insufficient resources and insufficient recognition into a state of professionally functional despair. Mrs. Krabappel smokes. She grades papers carelessly. She is sarcastic about her students' abilities in ways that a functioning, supportive educational institution would never permit. She has, in various episodes, revealed that she finds her work largely meaningless. That the gap between what she hoped to accomplish as a teacher and what she has actually accomplished is a gap she has learned to not look at directly. But she also, occasionally, does what Mr. Bergstrom did for Lisa. She sees a student clearly and responds to what she sees with genuine care. The extra point she gives Bart in Bart Gets an F is the clearest example, but it is not the only one. Krabappel does not hate the children. She has been made to seem like she does, and the comedy operates in that seeming. But underneath the sarcasm is a woman who chose this profession for a reason and who has not entirely abandoned the reason, no matter how buried it has become. The school's relationship with Lisa deserves particular attention because it is the clearest illustration of how the institution fails its exceptional students as thoroughly as it fails its struggling ones. Lisa is not served by Springfield Elementary any more than Bart is, though the failures take different forms. Her needs are not met because the school has no mechanism for meeting them. There is no gifted program worth the name. There are no teachers equipped to push her further. There is no culture of intellectual excellence that would give her peers with whom to engage seriously. She is left to her own devices in a way that is nominally fine because she is academically succeeding, but is deeply inadequate for the actual development of a mind like hers. The show depicts this through Lisa's isolation in academic settings. She raises her hand and the other children roll their eyes. She answers correctly and the teacher moves quickly past the answer towards something the class can engage with. She exists in the school as a kind of embarrassment, a reminder of what the school is not providing for anyone, and the institution does not quite know what to do with the reminder. This is accurate. This is what happens to exceptional students in underfunded, undertrained school systems. They are allowed to succeed on their own, and the institution takes credit for their success without having provided the conditions that made it possible. Lisa is succeeding despite Springfield Elementary, not because of it. And the school is not honest enough with itself to acknowledge the difference. There is a teacher at Springfield Elementary who deserves more attention than he usually receives, Mr. Largo, the music teacher. Mr. Largo is an adult who has completely given up. He teaches music with an expression of permanent resignation, conducting the school band through pieces that do not challenge anyone, responding to creativity with mild irritation, existing in his role the way a piece of furniture exists in a room, present, functional in the narrowest possible sense, not quite conscious of the space it occupies. When Lisa plays her saxophone, Largo does not hear it. He hears a deviation from the written music. He hears a student going off script, ignoring the arrangement, producing notes that were not asked for. He tries to stop it. He consistently tries to stop it. Because the music department's job, as Largo has come to understand it, is to produce performances that are adequate and controlled, not to nurture the kind of passionate, searching, individual musical expression that Lisa brings to her instrument. Lisa plays despite Mr. Largo the way she does everything else in Springfield. Despite the institution, around it, in the margins of it, finding the note the arrangement does not account for, and playing it anyway, because not playing it would cost her something she cannot afford to lose. The show frames Largo as a joke, which he is. He is also a portrait of what institutions do to the people inside them when those institutions are failing. They do not just fail their students, they fail their teachers. They take the Mr. Bergstroms who come in with genuine passion and genuine skill and genuine care, and they wear them down, year after year, through bureaucratic indifference and inadequate support, and the grinding of a system that values compliance over excellence, until what is left is something like Largo, technically present, functionally absent, a placeholder for a teacher rather than the real thing. The physical condition of Springfield Elementary is its own commentary. The building is perpetually in disrepair. The cafeteria serves food that is genuinely dangerous. The gymnasium has equipment that should have been condemned decades ago. The library has books that are out of date and damaged and insufficient in number. The classrooms are overcrowded. None of this is hidden. The show does not treat the school's physical condition as background detail. It is foregrounded regularly, used as the setting for jokes, incorporated into plots. The school is falling apart and everyone knows it and nothing is done about it because the town, as we have discussed, has made the suppression of inconvenient truths into its primary civic activity. The school is falling apart. The power plant is poisoning the water. Mr. Burns is keeping the sun away. These are all the same category of problem. a community that knows something is wrong and has decided that knowing is enough. The children of Springfield Elementary are being failed by a system that was not designed with their success in mind. They are being warehoused, like Grandpa in his retirement castle, until they are old enough to be useful in other ways. The school's job is not to develop human potential. Its job is to produce workers compliant enough to do the jobs the town needs done and not ask too many questions about the water quality. Lisa already knows this. Bart, on some level, has always known it. The school confirmed what the world was telling them both. Your needs are not the priority here. Find a way to manage. Section 9. Every episode that broke the comedy format. There is a category of Simpsons episode that the fan base has long recognized and for which there is no entirely adequate name. The episodes where the show stops being a comedy in the functional sense and becomes something else. Where the jokes fall away and the emotional content fills the entire frame, and you finish watching feeling like you have been through something real, not entertained. Something more like moved or implicated or genuinely surprised by what a joke cartoon was willing to do. These episodes are not anomalies. They are the show's periodic insistence on honesty, the moments when the comedy format is insufficient to contain what the show has to say, and the show says it anyway, trusting its audience to follow. Let us go through the most important ones. And Maggie Makes 3, Season 6, 1995. This is the episode we touched on in the Homer section, but it deserves its full examination here because it is the most complete statement the show has ever made about what love is and what it costs and why it is worth the cost anyway. The structure of the episode is itself unusual. The family is sitting around the dinner table and Homer announces that there are no pictures of Maggie in the family photo album. The children ask why. And Homer tells the story of Maggie's birth, which is also the story of his second departure from the bowling alley and his return to the plant. The storytelling conceit creates distance. You are watching Homer tell a story rather than experiencing the story directly, which means the emotional revelations arrive with a double weight. The weight of the events themselves and the weight of Homer choosing to share them now, with his children, at the dinner table. Homer describes his happiness at the bowling alley. He describes Marge telling him she is pregnant. He describes the despair of going back to Burns. And the way the episode renders that despair, not as self-pity but as grief, as the grief of someone who glimpsed a version of his life that was real and good and then watched it close, is one of the most precisely honest depictions of that particular human experience. Then the reveal, the photographs. Every single picture the family has of Maggie is at Homer's workstation, covering the plaque, and the remaining letters read, "Do it for her." The show does not ask you to make peace with what Homer gave up. It asks you to make peace with what he chose instead. These are different things. The bowling alley was real, the happiness was real, and Maggie is real. He chose Maggie. He keeps choosing Maggie. And the way he made that choice visible, not in words but in photographs, in the daily act of looking at her face and going to work anyway, is the most quietly heroic thing Homer Simpson has ever done. The episode ends without a joke. It just ends. The family sits there together. Homer looks at Maggie. The show lets the silence be what it is. Homer's enemy. Season 8, 1997. This is the most structurally unusual episode in the show's history. It is the only episode where the show looks at Springfield from outside the Simpson family's perspective and finds Springfield as disturbing as it actually is. Frank Grimes, a man who has worked incredibly hard for everything he has, who has earned his professional qualifications through genuine effort and genuine sacrifice, is hired at the nuclear power plant. He meets Homer, and he cannot understand Homer. Homer has a house and a family and a job he did not earn and a life he does not deserve by any rational measure. Homer is incompetent and oblivious and beloved by everyone around him. Homer wins, constantly, without trying, apparently through the sheer gravitational force of his own cluelessness. And Frank Grimes, who has tried for everything and scraped for everything, watches Homer win and begins to lose his mind. The episode ends very badly. It ends in a way that the show had never done before and has never quite done since, with Frank Grimes in a complete psychological break, imitating Homer's carelessness in an ironic gesture that kills him, and Homer at the funeral, falling asleep and saying something inappropriate in his sleep, and the congregation laughing. The show does not pull back from what it has said in this episode. It does not soften the conclusion. Frank Grimes dies because the universe is not fair, because effort does not guarantee outcome, because Homer's world operates on different rules than the ones Frank Grimes was raised to believe in. And Homer does not understand what happened. He cannot. His brain, with or without the crayon, with or without the radiation, is not equipped to feel the weight of what Frank Grimes represented. The man who came from outside Springfield and looked at it with clear eyes and was destroyed by what he saw. Homer's enemy is the show telling you what it actually thinks about Homer. Not what it wants you to feel about him, which is warmth, but what it observes about him. That he is, from a certain angle, a monument to the unfairness of the world. That his success is not earned. That the systems that reward him punish better people. That the joke of Homer Simpson, which is lovable and warm when you are inside it, looks very different from the outside. The episode is genuinely disturbing. It was when it aired, and it remains so. It is the show being honest about something it usually keeps covered by comedy. Mother Simpson, Season 7, 1995. We have discussed this episode in context of Homer's backstory, but its emotional texture deserves a closer look. The episode is structured around a reunion. Homer and his mother find each other in a cemetery, standing near a grave that belongs to neither of them, and the first thing they do is stand apart from each other and look, just look, at who the other person became in the time they were apart. Mona Simpson, voiced by Glenn Close in one of the most quietly devastating guest performances in the show's history, is small and white-haired and full of grief that she does not allow to be melodramatic. She looks at her son, who is now older than she ever saw him, and she absorbs the fact of what she missed, the first day of school, the awkward years, the falling in love with Marge and the marriage and the children she has never met. She missed all of it. She missed being his mother. And Homer, for his part, absorbs the fact that she is real, that she was always real, that the hole in his life was a person and that person is standing in front of him. The episode's climax involves Mona having to flee again. Burns identifies her and the FBI comes and she escapes with help from her son, who for once in his life connects the thing in front of him to the systems behind it. He helps her because she is his mother and because Burns is his enemy in a way he finally, briefly understands. The last scene of the episode is Homer standing on a hill, watching the taillights of his mother's getaway car disappear into the distance. He waves. She does not see him. He stands there for a long moment after the lights are gone, and then the camera slowly pulls back and up, going wide, showing the small figure of Homer Simpson on the hill in the dark, waving at nothing. The show does not put a joke here. It does not need to. The image says everything. A middle-aged man waving goodbye to his mother on a hilltop in the dark. All the years that happened before this moment, and all the years that will come after it. All the people they were to each other and all the people they did not get to be. The wave that she cannot see, the credits roll, the show moves on. Homer waves. Bart sells his soul, as discussed in the Bart section, but let us add one detail here that is easy to miss. When Lisa buys Bart's soul back from the comic store, she does not tell him she is going to do it. She does not ask for thanks. She does not use it as leverage or as a demonstration of her own moral superiority or as a teaching moment about the real value of spiritual things. She just does it, and she hands him the paper and she goes back to bed. That action, that silent, private act of caring for her brother without requiring acknowledgement, is one of the show's most precise emotional details. Lisa is 8 years old, and she has already understood something about love that many adults never learn. That the purest form of care does not announce itself. It just acts. She may be the loneliest character in Springfield, but she is also, quietly, one of the most loving. Lisa's substitute and Summer of 4 Feet 2 have been covered, but there is an episode that contains perhaps the single most purely devastating moment in the entire run of the show, and it deserves its own space here. Doin' in the Wind, from Season 10, is not generally considered one of the great episodes. It is about Homer trying to find his hippie spirit, and it is mostly played for comedy. But it contains a single scene that the show slides past so quickly that it is easy to miss. Homer is looking through a box of his mother's old possessions. He finds a photograph. He looks at it. And in the photograph, Mona is young, younger than Homer is now, holding a baby. The baby is Homer. She is looking down at the baby with an expression of such complete, transparent love that it is physically difficult to look at directly. Homer holds the photograph. The show gives him a moment with it. One moment. And then the comedy reasserts itself and the scene moves on. But in that moment, Homer held evidence of what he lost. Not her face, which he barely remembers. Not her voice, which he never heard say his name as an adult. The fact that she loved him. She looked at him that way. She held him and looked at him and loved him in the way that the photograph captured, and then she was gone, and he grew up not knowing it. The comedy forgives you for crying at that. The comedy gives you cover. But the grief is real, and the show knows it, and the photograph is there in the episode for anyone who needs it. Lisa's wedding deserves space here because it is the show's most extended and most beautiful meditation on the future it will never allow itself to have. The episode is a flash forward. Lisa is 23 and in England and engaged to a young man named Hugh. The future Springfield is rendered in loving, funny detail. The show imagines what the characters would be like 20 years older, what their relationships would look like, what the Simpson family dynamic would have settled into. Homer and Lisa's relationship in this future is the emotional center of the episode. They have not grown apart, as you might fear given the profound gap between them in the present. They have grown toward each other in the way that children and parents often do when the child becomes an adult, and the parent is seen not as the authority figure who fell short, but as the person underneath that role. Lisa loves her father in this future with a full-eyed, uncomplicated warmth that is different from the complicated, patient love she has for him in the present. And Homer is still Homer. He is older and slightly more arthritic and still capable of extraordinary social mishaps, but he is trying in this future. He is making the effort to be the father Lisa deserves, awkwardly and imperfectly, and with genuine heart. The episode ends with Lisa not marrying Hugh. She realizes he cannot accept her family, cannot love the part of her that is Homer's daughter, and that a love that requires her to be embarrassed by where she came from is not the right love. She goes home. She calls Homer. And Homer, on the phone, not quite understanding what she is saying, just glad she called, just glad to hear her voice, is everything. The flash forward closes. Lisa returns to being 8 years old. The future disappears back into the hypothetical. But you were there. You saw what they could be to each other. And the show carries that forward in the way that the best fictional relationships carry their futures inside them, even when the story will not let those futures happen. Section 10. The town as a character. Springfield's darkness. Springfield is not a setting. It is a condition. The town exists as an expression of something true about American life. The way that communities can be simultaneously warm and cruel, familiar and strange, full of genuine human connection, and structured to prevent that connection from going too deep. Springfield is where you live when the American dream has been delivered to you in a slightly wrong size, close enough to wear but never quite comfortable, and you have decided, collectively, to pretend that it fits. The buildings are familiar. The institutions are recognizable. The people are the people you grew up with or work with or see at the store. And underneath all of it, the power plant runs and the water flows and the fish have 3 eyes and nobody asks the question that would unravel everything. Let us go into the specific places and people that make Springfield what it is. Moe's Tavern is the most important location in Springfield that is not the Simpson house, and it is a portrait of male loneliness that has no equal in American popular culture. Moe Sislak runs a bar that most people would not choose to be in. The light is bad. The drinks are generic. The decor has not been updated since a decade when the decor was already depressing. The clientele is a small, consistent group of men who have nowhere else to go and who have tacitly agreed to go nowhere together. The regulars at Moe's are a cross-section of a specific kind of American male failure, Homer, who uses the bar as an escape from the life he also loves. Lenny and Carl, who are actually best friends and relatively functional, but who use the bar the same way everyone else does, as a place to exist without being required to produce anything. Barney Gumble, who is the bar's most extreme and most heartbreaking case. Barney was Homer's friend in high school. He was bright and had ambitions, and then he took a beer at a party in his youth, apparently his first. And something changed. The show treats this as a gag origin story, but the result is not a gag. Barney is a man who has been functionally alcoholic for his entire adult life, who has let every possibility slip past while he sat on a bar stool, who is aware of this, who sometimes has moments of genuine clarity about it, and who returns to the bar stool anyway because the alternative, the sober version of his life, is a thing he is not able to face. There is an episode, Homer versus Patty and Selma, that is not primarily about Barney, but which contains a moment where Barney speaks about what he might have been, the opera singer, the filmmaker, the person he had ambitions to be before the bar, and the pain is real and unguarded in a way that the show rarely allows for this character. He knows. He has always known, and he cannot bridge the gap between the knowing and the changing. Mo is his own separate tragedy. He is a man who has loved and lost and built a life around the loss in the way that some people do, keeping themselves available for love in theory by running a social space, while making themselves practically unavailable for it through their personality and circumstances. He has fallen for women across the show's run, always hopelessly, always with a comic dignity that is also a real dignity, always unsuccessfully. He wants to be loved in the complete, seen, chosen way. He is not sure he is worth it. The bar keeps him occupied enough to not have to decide. Moe's Tavern is where Springfield's men go when the performance of having everything under control becomes too exhausting to maintain. In the bar, they can admit, without saying it, that things are not entirely fine, that they are tired, that they are lonely, that the life they are living is not quite the life they imagined, and that they are not entirely sure what to do with the gap. The beer helps. It has never helped. They come back anyway. Sideshow Bob is one of the show's most elaborate examples of wasted potential, and the show is clearly aware of this and has used it deliberately across many seasons. Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., known as Sideshow Bob, is one of the most intelligent characters in Springfield. He went to Yale. He has sophisticated tastes in music, literature, and theater. He is capable of genuinely impressive schemes that require intelligence, patience, and sophisticated knowledge of human psychology. He speaks several languages. He is also a recurring attempted murderer who has devoted an extraordinary portion of his adult life to trying to kill a 10-year-old boy. The comedy of Sideshow Bob is the gap between his refinement and his obsession, between his obvious capability and the thing he has chosen to do with it. A man of his education and intelligence could, in theory, do almost anything, and he has chosen to make a child his nemesis. But the show also gives Bob, particularly in the episode Brother from Another Series, a genuine emotional backstory. He has a brother, Cecil, who is also intelligent and also wasted and who resents Bob even more than Bob resents Bart, because Cecil was the one who truly wanted to be Krusty's sidekick, and Bob was the one who got the job by accident and then used the job as a platform for a scheme that sent him to prison. The family dynamic between Bob and Cecil is the show's most acidic portrait of sibling resentment, of the way one person's success, even accidental and ultimately disastrous success, can warp a sibling's entire emotional trajectory. Bob is in prison repeatedly, and he keeps getting out, and the cycle continues. But the cycle is also the show saying something about what happens to intelligence that has no adequate outlet, to capability that is not recognized or supported or directed toward anything constructive. Bob is brilliant and educated and completely unable to apply those qualities to anything that matters. He has become the sum of his resentments. His entire identity is organized around the thing he cannot have and the child he cannot destroy. There is a sadness in Bob that the comedy barely covers. He is wasted, not in the bar sense, but in the elemental sense. He is a waste of a human being, and he is a waste because the world that produced him did not know what to do with what he was, and so he turned what he was against the world instead. Krusty the Clown is the show's most direct portrait of unprocessed childhood trauma and its consequences. Herschel Krustofsky is the son of a rabbi. His father wanted him to follow the rabbinical tradition. Krusty wanted to be a clown. The conflict between them, the rupture it caused, the decades they spent estranged, is the backstory for one of television's most enduring comedy characters. Krusty's entire life, the success and the excess and the desperate clowning and the inability to hold on to anything real, flows from that original wound. The father who would not accept him. The show addresses this explicitly in the episode Like Father, Like Clown, which is a loving parody of the jazz singer and which is one of the show's most emotionally direct episodes. Krusty's father does not recognize him because his father is ashamed of him. The man his father sees performing as a clown is not the son he wanted, and he has made the choice to respond to this disappointment by pretending the son does not exist. The resolution of this episode, the reconciliation between Krusty and his father, is one of the show's warmest moments. And then the show moves on and Krusty returns to his normal patterns, the gambling and the drinking and the carelessness and the spectacular self-destruction that punctuates his professional success, because the reconciliation with his father, while real and healing, does not undo 30 years of the wound. It does not return what was lost. The clown keeps performing because performing is what he learned to do when being himself was not enough. Krusty is also the show's most direct portrait of the comedy world's particular pathology, the entertainer whose pain is the engine of the entertainment. He is genuinely funny, he is also genuinely damaged. And the two things are causally related in the way that the show does not often make explicit but has always understood. The performance of happiness is a particular kind of work, and the people who do it best are often the ones most familiar with the absence of it. There is a character in Springfield who appears in the background of nearly every crowd scene, who has no backstory and no arc and no name that most viewers know, but who has become, through repetition, one of the show's most quietly eloquent figures. This is the man with the mustache at the back of the mob. He is there every time Springfield forms one, which is often, in response to threats real and imagined, against enemies foreign and domestic, motivated by panic or rumor, or the particular electricity that passes through a crowd when everyone's worst impulse finds permission. He is there, in the crowd, with his torch or his pitchfork or his sign, and he shouts along with everyone else. And then the mob disperses, and he goes home and the show moves on. He is Springfield. He is the aggregate of Springfield. Not Homer, or Marge, or Lisa. Not the characters with names and histories and the particular weight of being seen. He is the background. He is the mass. He is the version of the town that exists outside the narrative frame, that the camera does not follow, that lives and eats and votes and forms opinions and joins mobs without anyone asking why. The show has always known that Springfield is more than its named characters, that the real Springfield is in the crowd. And by keeping the crowd there, episode after episode, doing what crowds do, it is making an argument about America that is too large and too important to be made through any individual story. The mob forms. The mob disperses. Everything goes back to normal. The man with the mustache goes home. And next week, when something new requires a mob, he will be there again. Section 11. What the show was actually about this whole time. There is a speech that Matt Groening has never given publicly, as far as anyone knows. A speech that describes explicitly, in plain terms, what The Simpsons has been about since the beginning. He has not given this speech because it would ruin the joke. And the joke is important. The joke is the delivery mechanism. The joke is what makes the show accessible and beloved and able to reach people who would run from the explicit version of what the show is saying. You cannot put the speech inside the cartoon. You have to let the cartoon be the speech. But if you had to reconstruct the speech from what the show has been saying, episode by episode, season by season, for 36 years, it would go something like this. The American working-class family is under an enormous amount of pressure, and nobody is acknowledging it honestly. The fathers are being ground down by jobs they cannot leave. The mothers are carrying invisible labor that the culture does not value or see. The children are growing up inside an educational system that was not designed for their success and a social environment that rewards performance over authenticity. The old people are being warehoused and forgotten. The institutions that are supposed to serve the community, the schools, the churches, the government, the media, are either failing in their purpose or actively complicit in the conditions that make life hard. And underneath all of this, underneath every gag and every joke and every celebrity cameo and every ridiculous plot, there is a family that loves each other. That is it. That is the speech. The love is real. The pressure is real. The love exists inside the pressure. Both things are simultaneously true, and The Simpsons are the proof. The show's relationship with grief is its most under-examined quality. The Simpsons is saturated with grief. Not the demonstrative, scene-making kind of grief that earns Emmy nominations, but the quiet, ambient, almost structural grief of people who have lost things they cannot name and carry the loss without quite knowing they are carrying it. Homer grieves his mother. He has been grieving her since he was 6 years old and did not know her name for what it was. Just knew there was something missing, some warmth that the house did not have, some word that was supposed to be said that no one ever said. That grief is in every episode. It is in his eating and his drinking, and his desperate need for Marge, and his inability to receive love cleanly without immediately worrying about losing it. Marge grieves the version of herself that the choices of her 20s foreclosed. She does not do this explicitly or dramatically. She does it in the quiet moments, in the gallery visits and the painting sessions and the brief, flickering moments when the ambition she set aside reappears long enough to remind her of its existence. She is not broken by this grief. She has integrated it, but it is there. Bart grieves the father he would have had if Homer were a different man. This is the most invisible grief in the family because Bart has no frame for articulating it, no language for the specific sadness of loving a father you also cannot quite rely on. He expresses it through behavior, through the pranks and the disruptions and the things he does to make Homer react, because a reaction, even an angry one, even a strangling, is at least a form of being seen. Lisa grieves the world she cannot fix. She is a child with a fully formed moral sense and a complete inability to make the world match that morality. She knows what is right and she cannot make it right, and the gap between the knowledge and the capability is a source of constant, daily sadness that she has learned to metabolize into saxophone music and books, and the quiet practice of staying herself inside a town designed to flatten her. And Maggie. We do not know what Maggie grieves, but she has been watching all of this since she was born, absorbing it with the particular attention of a child who has not yet learned to look away, and whatever she is carrying in her silence, it is not nothing. The show has always been about survival. Emotional survival, familial survival, the particular kind of survival that is not dramatic or heroic, but which requires, every day, the unglamorous decision to keep going. Homer survives, not through strength or intelligence or planning. He survives through the same quality that makes him maddening and lovable in equal measure. He does not give up. He cannot, because he does not have the cognitive architecture for strategic retreat. He just keeps showing up, at the dinner table, at the plant, at the couch, at Marge's bedside when she is sick. He shows up and he is present in his blundering, oblivious, sometimes damaging way. And this consistency, this relentless showing upness, is the foundation that the family is built on. Marge survives through patience that is not passive but active, through the constant, deliberate choice to make room for the family's needs, even when her own needs are pressing. Her survival is in the kitchen, and the blue hair and the pearls, and the way she says Homer's name when he is about to do something catastrophic, with the particular music of a person who has said this name 10,000 times and still means it. Bart survives through humor and through the loyalty of a boy who has decided, somewhere underneath the pranks, that his family is worth defending even when it is also the source of his pain. His survival is in the skateboard and the friends and the moments of genuine grace that the show gives him when the comedy strips away. Lisa survives through books and music and the refusal to accept Springfield's definitions of what is possible for her. Her survival is in every hand she raises, that nobody wants to see raised. In every note she plays that Mr. Largo does not want to hear. In every time she looks at the world and says, "This is not good enough, and I am not going to pretend that it is." And Maggie survives by watching, by listening, by absorbing everything and deciding, with the patience of someone who is not in a hurry, what to do about it. The Simpsons is a show about survival, about the specific, daily, unheroic survival of a family that loves each other inside circumstances that are trying to make love impossible. And the show has been saying this for 36 years, through nearly 800 episodes, through the gags and the catchphrases and the celebrity cameos and all the rest of it. The love is the point. The survival is the proof. The joke is the container. And what the container holds is something true about what human life actually feels like from inside it, which is messy and funny and crushing and warm and relentless and full of grief and full of grace and never, ever finished. Section 12. The ending that never comes and why that's the point. It is the year 2025 and Bart Simpson is still 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. He has skateboarded past the same four houses in the same Springfield street in the same opening credits sequence more times than most things on Earth have happened. He has written his name on the same chalkboard in the same classroom in different sentences so many times that the actor who voices him, Nancy Cartwright, has spoken those few lines of dialogue more than almost any words in the history of recorded human speech. He is 10 years old. He will always be 10 years old. And this fact, which most people accept without thinking about it because it is simply how animated television works, is actually one of the most emotionally significant facts in the history of American popular culture. Why do we need Bart to be 10? The practical answer is that the floating timeline is an industry convention. Animated characters do not age because aging produces continuity problems and eventually forces a conclusion, and a conclusion would end the revenue stream. This is true, and it is also not the whole truth. The whole truth is that we need the Simpsons not to age because we need them to be there. Not them specifically, not the individual characters, but the thing they represent. The family at 6 o'clock, the house on Evergreen Terrace, the kitchen where Marge is cooking something, the couch where Homer is watching television, the bedroom where Bart is planning something inadvisable, the room where Lisa is reading. We need that house to be standing. We need the family to be in it. We need to know that on Sunday night, or whatever night you watch, or whatever night you remember from childhood when you watched, that house is lit and the family is inside it and nothing terrible has happened that cannot be undone by the next episode. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from the inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He was writing in the 17th century, and he was talking about distraction, about the human need to fill the silence with activity rather than sit inside it and feel it. The Simpsons is the most successful room-filling activity in the history of American television. Not because it is loud or exciting or dramatic, though it can be all of those things, because it is familiar. Because sitting down to watch it is a specific, known feeling, like coming home to a house you have been in 1,000 times, where everything is where you expect it to be, and the smell is right, and the temperature is right, and for a half hour, nothing is required of you, except to be there. That feeling is not nothing. It is actually quite a lot. It is the feeling of being held by something larger than yourself, something that was there before you started watching and will be there after you stop. Something that does not ask for anything except your presence. The Simpsons has been holding people for 36 years. Through childhoods and adolescences and the specific loneliness of being 23 and in a city where you do not know anyone and it is Sunday night and you turn on the television and Homer says something stupid in that specific voice that you have known since before you understood it, and for a moment everything is okay. Through grief. Through the end of relationships and the beginning of new ones, and the years in between where you are in motion and do not know where you are going. Through the deaths of parents and the births of children, and the slow recognition that you are now the parent sitting on the couch watching the show that used to be on before your bedtime. The show has been there for all of it, unchanging. Homer still falling down, Bart still skateboarding, Marge still in the kitchen with the blue hair, Lisa still playing her saxophone in her room while the world outside does not listen. We pressed pause on them. We did it out of love, the specific love of people who do not want to lose the thing they are holding. We froze them in 1989, and we have been visiting them in that frozen state for 36 years. And they are always glad to see us, which is to say, they are always the same. Which is to say, they never leave. The show knows what it is doing. It has known for a long time. There is an episode from Season 9, The Last Temptation of Crust, which is not one of the show's great episodes, but which contains a line that has always struck me as the show speaking about itself. Krusty, briefly reformed and determined to be a serious comedian, is asked why he went back to clowning after being sincere. He says something that amounts to, "Because the people need me to be what I am, and what I am is what they need. The Simpsons is what we need. Not because it is the best show or the most sophisticated or the most emotionally devastating, though it is sometimes all of those things. Because it is the show that was there, that is always there. That will be there next week, the same way it was there this week and last week, and every week going back to 1989. There is comfort in that consistency that is hard to explain to someone who did not grow up with it. It is not nostalgia exactly, or not only nostalgia. It is something more fundamental. It is the pleasure of a world that holds its shape, of a family that stays together, of a house that does not change. Here is what we lose if The Simpsons ages. We lose Bart at 10, which means we lose the specific quality of being 10, which is the quality of having unlimited days ahead and unlimited mischief available, and unlimited capacity for the kind of joy that does not require justification. 10-year-olds do not think about what they are doing or why. They just do it. The skateboard, the prank, the moment of grace in the middle of the chaos. All of it is available to a 10-year-old in a way that it will never quite be again. If Bart turns 11, that is over. If Bart turns 20, it is a memory. We keep Bart at 10 because we cannot bear to let that quality go. We lose Lisa at 8, which means we lose the specific quality of being 8 years old and idealistic in a world that has not yet fully convinced you that idealism is naive. 8-year-olds still believe that if they argue well enough, clearly enough, truthfully enough, the adults will listen and the world will change. Lisa at 8 is the version of all of us that we had before we were talked out of it. We keep her at 8 because we cannot afford to let her get talked out of it, because if Lisa stops believing, then something is over that we are not ready to call over. We lose Homer at 38, or wherever he is, in a particular middle-aged state that is also, if you squint, the universal state of a person who is not young anymore and not old, who has made the choices that shape a life and is now living inside those choices, loving them and grieving them simultaneously. Homer at middle age is the show's most honest age. Old enough to know what was lost, young enough to still be in the middle of it. If Homer gets older, the grief tips into something heavier. We keep him in the middle because that is where the balance is. And Marge. We keep Marge because the world the show depicts, the world of the permanent domestic, the blue hair in the kitchen and the patience and the pearls, is a world that many people grew up inside, and that many people left, and that many people miss in ways they cannot fully articulate. Marge, at whatever age she is, represents a version of stability that the world outside Springfield does not reliably provide, and keeping her there, keeping her exactly as she was in 1989, is a way of keeping that stability accessible. We keep them all because they are ours, because we made them ours by watching them so much for so long. Because the distance between us and them, the distance between the audience and the screen, is actually not very far when you have been watching the same family for 36 years. They are not characters anymore, exactly. They are residents of a place in our minds that was built while we were watching, piece by piece, episode by episode, and that place does not empty out when we stop watching. It stays. Homer is still in there, eating his donut. Marge is still in the kitchen. Bart is still planning something. Lisa is still playing her saxophone in her room. They are still there. They will always be still there. That is the whole point. The show has one ending that we all know is coming, and that the show has never quite gotten around to having. In this ending, Bart would be in his 40s. He would have children of his own by now, assuming the show's timeline were allowed to run. He would look at his children the way Homer looks at him, with the same desperate, helpless love that cannot quite translate itself into guidance but is enormous and real, and the center of everything. Lisa would be a doctor or a senator or a writer or an activist or all four, still fighting, still raising her hand, still playing her saxophone in an office somewhere while the world doesn't listen enough but listens more than it used to. Maggie would be speaking. She would have, presumably, said something worth waiting for. And Homer and Marge would be old. They would be old together in the house on Evergreen Terrace, in the good way, the way that long marriages go when they go right. With the shorthand of people who have known each other for decades, with the comfort of knowing someone completely, with the grief of watching children leave, and the particular sweetness of looking at each other and recognizing, still, the people they chose when they were young, and choosing still. That ending exists. It is inside the show, implicit in every episode, the conclusion that would arrive if the timeline were allowed to land. We have chosen not to have it. We press play and we keep the timeline floating, and we visit Springfield every week to check that the family is still there, still together, still okay, and they always are. They always are. That is the gift the show gives and keeps giving. Not a lesson, not a resolution, not an ending. Just the lights on in the house on Evergreen Terrace, and the family inside it, and the reminder, week after week, that some things hold. That love holds. That the particular, imperfect, exhausting, irreplaceable love of a family for itself holds, even when everything around it is difficult, even when the plant is leaking, and the water is wrong, and the billionaire won't die, and the fish has 3 eyes. The family holds. 36 years. Nearly 800 episodes. And the family holds. So here is where we end. Not at a conclusion, because Springfield does not have conclusions, it has episodes. Not with an answer, because the best mysteries are not answered, they are inhabited. We end where we started, with a feeling. The feeling is this. There is a cartoon family in a cartoon town that has been telling the truth about American life for longer than most of its audience has been alive. The truth is funny because the show makes it funny. The truth is sad because that is what truth often is. The truth is held inside a yellow, four-fingered, non-aging family on a couch in front of a television in a house on a street in a town that does not appear on any map. And somehow, inexplicably, after 36 years and all the things that have changed in the world and in us, the image of that family on that couch is still capable of producing something that feels like home. That is the thing the show was always about. Not the jokes, though the jokes are extraordinary. Not the mysteries, though the mysteries are genuinely strange and interesting. Not the predictions or the cultural satire or the guest stars or the awards. The family on the couch, the light in the window. Homer coming home through the front door, and Marge in the kitchen and Bart somewhere he should not be, and Lisa in her room with her saxophone, and Maggie and her bouncer watching everything. That image, that specific, unchanging, permanent, borrowed, beloved image. We will still be visiting it 36 years from now, if the show runs that long, which at this point it probably will. And when we do, Bart will still be 10. Lisa will still be 8. Homer will still be falling through the door. And the blue tower of Marge's hair will still be defying gravity and everything else. Some things should be allowed to last. Thank you for spending these 4 hours in Springfield. If this kind of slow, deep exploration is something you want more of, you know what to do. And if you are still awake, well done. Go get some rest. Springfield will be here when you come back. It always is. End of script. Total estimated length. 44,000 plus words. Section 13. The religion underneath the satire. The Simpsons goes to church every week. This is one of the show's least discussed and most remarkable facts. Homer tries to get out of it usually. Bart would rather be anywhere else. But they go. The family piles into the car and they go to the First Church of Springfield and they sit in their pew, and Reverend Lovejoy delivers a sermon that nobody listens to, and the show uses the church setting for jokes, and then the family goes home. But the church keeps appearing. Week after week, season after season, it is there. And the show's relationship with religion, which is far more sophisticated and far more honest than the surface mockery suggests, is one of its most enduring and least appreciated qualities. Reverend Lovejoy is, on the surface, another of Springfield's exhausted institutionalists. He has been delivering sermons to a congregation that does not listen for long enough that he has stopped expecting them to listen. His faith, if he still has it in the private hours, is something he does not wear on the outside. He is professionally religious in the way that some doctors are professionally healthy, because the job requires it, not because the belief sustains him. The show has revisited Lovejoy's inner life in a handful of episodes, usually gently, usually with more compassion than it applies to most of its adult characters. There is an episode where he almost leaves the ministry, where the accumulated weight of shepherding a congregation that uses him as a last resort rather than a genuine source of spiritual guidance nearly breaks him. He is driven away, the episode suggests, not by doubt but by irrelevance, by the specific despair of a man who chose a vocation on the basis of its importance and has spent his career in a context that treats it as optional. Ned Flanders saves him. Specifically, Ned Flanders' constant calls at all hours about minor religious concerns, calls that irritate Lovejoy so profoundly that they eventually drive him toward recommending that Ned adopt a hobby, lead to a crisis that reminds Lovejoy why he became a minister in the first place. The episode is comedic in execution, but the emotional arc underneath is real and specific and says something true about vocation and meaning and the way that purpose can be eroded by the conditions in which it is practiced. Homer's relationship with God is one of the show's most fascinating ongoing threads. Homer has met God. This is canonical, established in the episode Homer the Heretic in the 4th season. God appears to Homer in a dream after Homer skips church. He has a face, though the show keeps it carefully obscured, as if even the animators felt some residual uncertainty about depicting the divine directly. He has feet, which Homer notices specifically. He is warm and direct and willing to have a conversation with a man who has just chosen waffles over worship. God tells Homer in this conversation that he thinks about the big questions, that he is not as simple as he appears, that the inside of Homer's mind, which from the outside looks like a donut-scented blank, is actually something more complicated than that. And then, in the same season, 6 months before the coma episode, God tells Homer that his time is coming, that he will learn the meaning of life, but not yet. And the show layers this alongside the later episodes, the coma theory, the increasingly surreal adventures, the floating timeline, and you can read it as a prophecy or as comfort or as the show winking at you about everything it knows and is not quite saying. Homer meets God twice in the show's canon. This is more than most people in the Bible managed. And the second meeting, in a dream in a later episode, is equally warm and conversational. God sitting across from Homer in something like casual space, the two of them talking the way people talk when neither of them has anywhere to be. God talks to Homer. This is the detail Ned Flanders cannot know about without it breaking him, because Ned has devoted his entire life to God. His entire conscious adult identity is organized around faith, around the relationship with God that he maintains through prayer and church attendance, and the relentless practice of Christian virtue in a community that does not reward virtue at all. And God does not talk to Ned. God talks to Homer, who eats donuts during meltdown warnings and has an IQ of 55 and once caused a nuclear incident because he wanted to see if a donut would grow in a reactor core. The show does not moralize about this. It does not explain it. It just presents it in the way that it presents many of its most disturbing details, without comment, trusting the audience to sit with the implications. Why does God talk to Homer and not Ned? There are several possible answers, all of them interesting. The theological answer is that God goes to those who need him most, and Ned, despite appearances, needs him less than Homer does, because Ned's faith is a structure he lives inside rather than a conversation he needs to have. Homer has no structure. He is entirely without the kind of spiritual framework that tells you how to live and what to believe and where to go when things get hard. Homer just has the open air of his own incomprehension, and maybe that is the space where conversation becomes possible. The dramatic answer is that Homer is the protagonist, and protagonists get the divine encounters. But this is the show being cynical about itself in the way it often is, and it does not fully account for the emotional weight the show places on those moments. The honest answer might be simpler and darker than either of these. God talks to Homer because Homer is the show's ID, its most unfiltered human impulse, the character who most directly embodies everything American culture produces and cannot examine. If you want to say something about American life through the voice of God, you put it in Homer's dreams and let Homer half understand it and move on, and the audience will carry the rest. Lisa's spiritual journey is the show's most extended and most honest exploration of faith and doubt. She is raised Christian. She questions it early, with the directness of a child who has not yet learned that questioning things openly is a social risk. She moves through several phases of spiritual inquiry across the show's run, each one treated seriously by the narrative even when it is framed comedically. She finds Buddhism in season 13, and the show takes her conversion seriously, as I mentioned earlier. But the reason the spiritual inquiry matters is what it reveals about what Lisa is looking for. She is not looking for God in the traditional sense. She is looking for a framework that makes sense of suffering. She is looking for an explanation for why the world is the way it is, and why the people who try hardest are not always, or even usually, the people who succeed. She is looking for a way to be good inside a world that is not. The Buddhism provides the framework she could not find in the Christianity she was born into. Not because Christianity does not address suffering, but because the particular version of American Christianity that Springfield practices is mostly about comfort and community and the assurance that things will be fine eventually, and Lisa does not find that honest. Things are not fine. The fish has 3 eyes and the plant is leaking and the school is underfunded, and the old people are in the warehouse and the billionaire is blocking the sun. Things are not fine. Buddhism does not promise that things will be fine. It promises that you can learn to be fully present inside the things that are not fine without being destroyed by them. It promises that suffering is the condition, not the exception, and that learning to sit inside that truth without recoiling from it is the work of a lifetime. For Lisa, who has been sitting inside uncomfortable truths since she was old enough to understand them, this is not depressing. It is a relief. Someone built a whole philosophical tradition around the things she has been doing alone in her room in Springfield. And the tradition says, yes, this is the work. You are doing the right thing. Keep going. She keeps going. The show's treatment of death is another area where the comedy format is stretched almost to its limit. Springfield has a high death rate for a fictional town, much of it played for comedy. Hans Moleman dies constantly. Side characters die and return. The show's anthology episodes, particularly the Treehouse of Horror specials, deal in death casually and graphically and with great humor. But the real deaths, the deaths that the show acknowledges as permanent, as carrying actual weight, are handled with unusual delicacy for a comedy series. Maud Flanders dies in season 11. She is killed by a t-shirt cannon at a speedway, Homer having dodged the shirts that hit her. The death is abrupt and untimely and random in the way that real death often is. And the show, in the episodes immediately following, handles Ned's grief with more honesty than most dramatic shows manage. Ned is devastated. He does not immediately process it and move on. He is angry at God in a way that his conditioning barely contains. He is lost. He is a man whose entire life was organized around a partnership that has been taken from him, and the loss does not resolve into anything clean or meaningful. It is just loss, abrupt and random and permanent. The show has sometimes been criticized for how quickly it moved past Maud's death in subsequent seasons, for how thoroughly Ned's widowhood was eventually treated as comedy fodder rather than ongoing grief. This is fair. The comedy format has limits. You cannot run a 30-year grief arc in a show that resets between episodes. But in the immediate aftermath, the show was honest. And the honesty of it, in a comedy series, in a show that had spent a decade treating this character as primarily a punchline about religious zealotry, was one of the most unexpected and moving things the series ever produced. Bleeding Gums Murphy also dies in the season 6 episode Round Springfield. He is Lisa's spiritual mentor, the jazz musician she met in the first season who gave her the language for what her saxophone playing was doing. He is in the hospital when Lisa visits, and he dies during the episode. And Lisa grieves him in the show's most unguarded way. She grieves by playing. She plays his music. She plays it from a cloud, in a vision, with him visible in the sky, the show allowing itself a brief, beautiful moment of magical realism in service of the emotional truth that music is how Lisa speaks when words are not enough. The cloud dissipates. The vision ends. The show moves on. But the grief was real. And the show showed it without apologizing for it, without burying it immediately in a joke, without the comedy format fully reclaiming what had been briefly, genuinely surrendered to feeling. The show's relationship with money is inseparable from everything else it is about. Homer makes a specific salary. The show has mentioned it occasionally across its run, usually as context for the economic anxiety of a given episode. He does not make a lot. He makes enough, barely, for the house and the food and the car and whatever catastrophic financial decision is about to define the episode. He makes the salary of a man who is exactly where the system placed him and cannot get out. Springfield's economy is essentially Mr. Burns. The power plant employs a significant portion of the town's working population. The power plant's electricity powers everything else. The money flows from Burns through the plant, through the wages of the workers, through the local businesses, through the town's tax base, and back to Burns in various forms. It is a closed loop that benefits one person enormously and provides a modest, insecure, fundamentally dependent living to everyone else. This is not satire in the sense of exaggeration. This is a fairly accurate description of how company towns work and how they worked historically, and how the logic of those towns persists in various forms in contemporary American communities, where a single major employer defines the economic and social life of everyone around it. The workers are grateful for the jobs and afraid to lose them, and aware on some level that their gratitude and their fear are the employer's most important assets, more important than any machine in the plant. Homer is grateful and afraid. So is every worker at the plant. So is most of Springfield. Burns knows this. Burns has known this for a century. The gratitude and the fear are the system. They are what makes the violations possible. what keeps the water poisoned, and the fish mutant, and the sky occasionally dark. A workforce that is dependent is a workforce that will not ask questions. And Burns has spent over a century engineering that dependency with the patient, systematic efficiency of a man who understands power in its most fundamental form. The show understands money in a way that most American comedies do not. Most American comedies treat money as a source of comedic conflict rather than as a structural condition. Homer's financial decisions are funny, but the financial structure he operates inside, the structure that keeps him at the plant and Burns in the mansion, is not funny. It is the machinery of the show's world, and the comedy is what happens inside the machinery, not to the machinery itself. Section 14. The specific sadness of being Lenny and Carl. There are two men at the Springfield nuclear power plant who have been present in nearly every episode since the show began. They stand at the back of scenes. They drink at Moe's. They attend Homer's disasters and celebrate his occasional victories. They are part of the furniture of Springfield in a way that suggests permanence, continuity, the kind of background presence that any world needs to feel populated. Their names are Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson. And the more you look at them, the more interesting they become. Lenny and Carl are best friends. The show has established this with the kind of casual certainty that suggests it has always been true and does not require explanation. They do everything together. They have the same social circle, the same job, the same bar, the same general orientation toward their lives, which is one of mild contentment punctuated by mild complaint. They are not unhappy people. They are not tragic in the way that Homer and Marge and Bart and Lisa are tragic. They are just there, consistent, present. The background of Springfield, the human wallpaper that gives the main characters a community to belong to. But there is a detail about Lenny and Carl that the show has embedded across its run so gently and so consistently that it almost does not register as anything remarkable. Carl Carlson has a doctorate. He attended MIT. He has, across the show, revealed expertise in multiple scientific and technical fields. He is, by any objective measure of educational achievement, vastly overqualified for his position at the nuclear power plant. Carl works at the plant because the plant is where he is. Because the job pays a salary and Springfield is where his life is, and the question of whether the life is what his education suggested it might be, is a question he has apparently decided not to ask too loudly. This detail, scattered across episodes that do not make it a theme or a storyline, is one of the show's quietest observations about the relationship between education and economic mobility in America. The promise of education, the thing students are told when they are deciding whether to stay in school, is that education opens doors, that the degree is the key. And Carl has the degree, the best degree, from one of the best institutions in the world, and he is standing next to Homer Simpson at a workstation in the nuclear plant, watching Homer put a donut in the reactor. The show does not make Carl bitter about this. Carl is not bitter. He is content, genuinely, in the way that some very intelligent people find contentment in simplicity, in friendship, in the texture of daily life rather than its achievements. But the gap is there. The gap between what Carl could have been and what Carl is, and the show places it in the background of hundreds of scenes without ever quite addressing it, which is its own kind of address. Lenny, for his part, has his own quiet depth. He is a man defined by his friendship. His relationship with Carl is the central fact of his social world, and the show has occasionally, gently, suggested that the nature of that friendship may be more complicated than either of them fully acknowledges. The show does not pursue this. It respects whatever the two men have decided about themselves and each other, but the possibility hangs in certain scenes like a question that has been asked and carefully not answered. What the show does with Lenny and Carl is use them to flesh out the human cost of the power plant's world. They are not Homer. They are not driven by his particular psychology of longing and self-destruction. They are simply two middle-aged men who work at a job they did not dream about and who have built a life around the friendship and the bar and the paycheck and who are, by most measures, doing okay. And in Springfield, doing okay is the best available outcome for most of the people who live there. The tragedy of Lenny and Carl, if it is a tragedy, is the tragedy of adequacy, of lives that are not catastrophic and not extraordinary, and that fill their time with the routine pleasures of routine people, and that will end, eventually, without having asked for more. This is not a small tragedy. It is, in many ways, the most common one. Section 15. What happens in the house after the credits roll? There is a question that the show never answers because it is the kind of question that shows like The Simpsons are not supposed to ask. What happens when the episode ends? What is the Simpson house like at 10:30 on a Sunday night when the comedy has resolved and the credits have rolled and the family is still there in the actual time of their lives, in the minutes and hours that are not the episode? This is an absurd question about a cartoon. There is nothing happening in the house after the credits roll. The characters exist only when the show requires them to. But the question produces something interesting when you consider it hypothetically, because the show has, across its run, given you enough information to construct a fairly specific picture of what the Simpson house is like in the ordinary hours that fall outside the episode frame. Marge is probably still awake. She tends toward wakefulness. The show has suggested this. The low-grade alertness of someone who never fully relaxes inside her own life, because relaxing requires confidence that everything is handled. And in the Simpson house, everything is never quite handled. She may be reading. She may be sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that has gone cold, doing nothing in particular, which is actually something very particular. It is a woman who never has time to do nothing, finding 5 minutes of it, and not quite knowing what to do inside them. Homer is asleep. He is asleep on the couch, television still on, the beer bottle or the empty glass of milk still in his hand. His breathing is the specific breathing of a man who is completely, utterly unconscious, who fell asleep without meaning to, who is now 10,000 miles below the surface of the waking world and will stay there until the alarm goes off or something wakes him. He is at peace and sleep in a way he rarely is awake. The lines of worry and comedy and failure and effort all smooth out when Homer sleeps. He looks in sleep, like the person he might have been if things had been different, like the bowl of unrealized potential that the show has always suggested he is. Peaceful, large, somehow younger, Bart is awake. He is almost certainly awake. He is doing something he should not be doing, but it is low-energy mischief, the kind that happens when a 10-year-old cannot fall asleep and the house is quiet. He is reading a comic book under the covers with a flashlight, or he is looking out the window at the street, or he is lying on his back in the dark thinking about things that he does not have words for and that will not become words until much later, if ever. He is thinking about his father. He thinks about his father more than he would ever say. Lisa is awake too, in a different way. Lisa is awake the way musicians are awake after a performance, with the residue of something still vibrating in her chest, the day not quite over because there is still thinking left to do. She may be writing in her journal, the one she has kept since she was old enough to understand that writing is how you make the interior world visible to yourself. She writes carefully, thoughtfully, in the specific handwriting of someone who has always loved the physical act of putting words down. She writes about what she noticed today, what she learned, what she still does not understand and suspects she will never understand and is, slowly, learning to make peace with not understanding. And Maggie. Maggie is in her crib, which she has been in for 36 years without outgrowing, which is its own kind of miracle or its own kind of symptom, depending on how you look at it. Maggie is awake or asleep. The show does not specify. But if she is awake, she is doing what she always does when no one is watching. She is watching. She is absorbing the quality of the house at 10:30, the specific texture of a family at rest, the sounds it makes when no one is performing for anyone. Homer's snoring. Marge's quiet. Bart's faint movement overhead. Lisa's occasional murmur of something, a word in a sentence she is writing. Maggie takes all of it in. She files it away in whatever place inside her holds the things she has observed and does not yet know what to do with. She will know eventually. She always does. This is the Simpson house at 10:30. This is the house that the credits roll on. This is the life that exists between the episodes, in the ordinary hours that are not spectacular enough to broadcast. It is, if you let yourself feel it, the most touching thing in the world. Section 16. The comedy that breaks your heart, close readings of small moments. The Simpsons communicates most honestly in its smallest moments. Not the set pieces, not the celebrity cameos, not the elaborate plots, but the moments that last 3 seconds and contain entire emotional universes. Let us spend some time with a few of these. There is a moment in the season 5 episode Homer Loves Flanders where Homer and Ned are enjoying an unexpectedly warm friendship after Homer wins a football and gives it to Ned. The town and the family are baffled by this friendship, and in one scene, Homer and Ned are sitting together watching television. And Homer looks over at Ned with an expression of genuine, uncomplicated happiness, and the show holds this expression for a beat longer than it needs to before the joke reasserts itself. That beat is the whole episode and is in some ways the whole show. Homer, happy, really happy in the uncomplicated way, not in the manic way or the performed way, just sitting next to someone he likes and feeling okay about his life. The beat is 3 seconds long and it contains 36 years of Homer trying to feel that way and mostly failing. There is a moment in Lisa's Substitute where Homer, arriving late to the moment where Mr. Bergstrom has just given Lisa her note, sees his daughter's face after she reads it. He has no idea what the note says. He has no idea what happened in class. He arrived too late for any of it. But he sees her face, glowing with something, full of something that he cannot name and that he had no part in producing. And the expression on Homer's face in that moment is complicated in a way that the show does not usually allow Homer's face to be complicated. It is pride and confusion and a little sadness and a great deal of love, all at once. He does not know what just happened to his daughter. But he can see that it was good. He puts his arm around her. The moment passes. The show moves on. But for a second, Homer was more than a cartoon. He was a father who loves his daughter, and who sometimes, when the comedy gives him a moment to breathe, can almost express it. There is a moment in Homer's barbershop quartet where Homer tells his family the story of being in a famous barbershop group in the late 1980s, and in the flashback, Homer is young and free in the specific way that the show has always suggested he was. Briefly, before the house and the children and the plant reasserted their claims, in the flashback he looks lighter. He moves differently. The specific weight that Homer carries in the present tense has not yet settled onto him. He is not quite Homer yet. And then the story ends and the flashback closes, and Homer is back in the present on the couch, telling the story to his family who is half listening, and the weight is back, and he is fully Homer again, and the show moves on. But you saw it. You saw the young version, and then you saw the old version, and the distance between them, the specific weight of 30-odd years of living as Homer Simpson, was briefly visible in the transition. The show did not underline this. It just showed you the two Homers, and trusted you to feel the space between them. Marge has a moment in a relatively minor episode that has always stayed with me. She is cleaning the house. This is not remarkable. Marge is often cleaning the house. But in this particular scene, she is cleaning the living room and she finds a photograph. She does not tell us who is in it. The show does not show us. She just picks it up and looks at it for a moment, and her expression, for a fraction of a second before the scene moves on, contains something that the show does not name. It might be nostalgia. It might be grief. It might be simple recognition, the acknowledgement that time passes and that photographs are what you have to show for it. The moment is not developed. It does not feed into a storyline. It exists for maybe 2 seconds, and then Marge puts the photograph down and keeps cleaning and the show moves on. But those 2 seconds are doing something that the show does continuously and without announcement. They are insisting on the interiority of a character who spends most of her time in service of other characters' interiority. Marge has a world inside her. The photograph reached into it. The show showed you the reaching, briefly, and then covered it back up. That is Marge. That is her whole story in 2 seconds of screen time. There is a moment in a Season 7 episode where Bart, having done something that he knows was wrong and which he cannot undo, goes to his room and closes the door. The show cuts to his face for just a moment before the scene ends, and what you see there is not the performance of Bart, not the troublemaker or the class clown or the 10-year-old who does not care about consequences. What you see is a child who knows he did something wrong and feels bad about it, and does not have anyone he can tell about the feeling. That is the whole of Bart's inner life in one expression. The knowledge and the solitude of the knowledge. The absence of someone to tell. And then the scene ends and the show moves on, and next week Bart is back to normal. Because that is how Springfield works. Because the reset is the show's commitment to Homer's dream, or the town's collective amnesia, or the floating timeline, or all three at once. But in that one moment, before the reset, you were inside Bart's room with him. Inside the moment that will never be spoken about. inside the child who is trying to grow up in a house in a town that cannot quite help him do it. The show has always known who Bart is. It shows you in those small moments when the comedy gives way and the real thing appears briefly before the comedy reasserts itself. Lisa has a moment just before she goes to sleep in an episode I cannot quite pin down, but which has remained in my mind since first watching it, where she is sitting on the edge of her bed with her saxophone across her lap, and she is not playing it, she is just holding it. The way you hold something that is important to you, with the specific care of a person who knows that this object is not just an object. The saxophone is Lisa's voice in the truest sense. It is the version of self-expression that Springfield cannot dismiss or silence or tell to sit down. When Lisa plays, she is fully herself in a way that she cannot be in the classroom or the dinner table or the school. The saxophone does not require her to moderate herself. It does not punish her for being too much. It receives everything she has and returns it as music. She sits on the edge of her bed and holds it and does not play it. And the show gives her this moment of quiet, this moment of simply being with the thing that matters most without doing anything with it, and then she puts it down and gets into bed and the episode moves on. But in that moment, she was 8 years old and she was also ageless. She was any person at any age who has ever sat with the thing that makes them most themselves and felt the specific peace of its presence. Section 17. The way Springfield loves. Springfield is not an unloving place. This is important to say because it is easy, after spending time with the show's darker layers, to conclude that Springfield is bleak. It is not bleak. It is complicated, and the complications are full of love. The love in Springfield is not the refined, articulate, emotionally literate kind of love. It is love that expresses itself in presence, in showing up, in doing the thing that needs to be done even when the doing is clumsy and imperfect and occasionally makes things worse before it makes them better. Homer's love for his family is the show's central exhibit. We have been through this. But the quality of his love, the specific texture of it, deserves one more look. Homer loves the way someone who does not have the language for love loves. He loves through food, through physical presence, through the specific gesture of putting himself between his family and danger even when he is also the danger. He loves through the covered plaque and the return to the plant and the wave to his mother's disappearing car in the dark. He loves through the 3 seconds of pure happiness watching Ned that the show gives him before taking it back. He loves in the way that people who were never taught to love properly love anyway. Imperfectly, completely, without reservation. Marge loves through patience and care, and the 10,000 small acts of attention that constitute the actual work of loving a family. She loves Homer by staying, which is also a choice she makes every day, and the staying is an act of love that the show renders visible by occasionally showing you the moments when she considers not staying, the moments when the frustration is large enough to threaten the patience, the moments when she is tired enough to think about what a different life might have felt like. She stays. The staying is love. The show knows this and treats it with the respect it deserves. Bart loves through loyalty. He is not a demonstrably affectionate child. He does not say the things that would make him clearly lovable in the conventional sense, but his love is in his actions. In the times he stands up for Lisa against bullying, in the times he covers for Homer, in the times he does something genuinely generous underneath the mischief, and the show briefly draws your attention to the generosity before covering it back up with a joke. Lisa loves through worry. She loves people by being afraid for them, by tracking their well-being with the attention of someone who cannot afford to miss anything. She loves Homer by not giving up on him, by continuing to believe that the person inside the impaired exterior is worth the effort of engagement. She loves Bart by buying back his soul. She loves Marge by seeing her. And Maggie loves by watching, by being present, by receiving the family's love and holding it safely in her silence, which is both the most passive and the most active form of love available to someone who has decided that the world is better served by her observation than her intervention. These are all imperfect forms of love. They all have costs. They all have gaps where something got missed or something got damaged because the love was not quite the right shape for the moment, but they are real. They are the love that exists inside an actual family rather than a fictional ideal, and they have been sustaining the Simpson family through 36 years of catastrophe and comedy and the ordinary, irreplaceable texture of daily life. The show's ending, the one it will eventually have to have, will be a test of everything it has been saying. If the show ends honestly, it will end with the family together. Not because all problems have been resolved, or because the plant has been cleaned up, or because Burns has finally died, or because any of the structural conditions of Springfield have changed, but because the family being together is the thing the show has always argued is the most important fact about them. The ending will probably be funny. It should be funny. The comedy is not decorating the show, it is the show, and an ending without the comedy would be a betrayal of 36 years of tonal consistency. But underneath the funny, the honest ending would contain something that the show has been building towards since that first Christmas episode in 1989. The recognition that this family, with all its damage and dysfunction and improbability, is also its own kind of miracle. That Homer and Marge found each other and stayed together and raised 3 children who are, in their various ways, going to be okay. That the world the show depicts, the contaminated, amnesiac, billionaire-haunted, fish-mutating world of Springfield, produced in the Simpson family something that the world cannot fully account for by its usual measures. It produced love. Imperfect, daily, unremarkable, genuine love. The kind that keeps showing up even when it does not know how to show up correctly. The kind that covers the cruelty with photographs. The kind that buys back the soul. The kind that waves at taillights in the dark. That is what the show has always been about. That is what every episode has been adding to. And when the ending comes, if the show is brave enough to be honest about what it has been building, that is what it will say. Section 18. The darkness, the comedy kept hidden. There is a particular technique the show uses so consistently that it has become invisible. It is the technique of burying the worst thing in the setup of a joke. The joke is the delivery mechanism. The information that the joke contains, the actual content of the thing being said, is frequently terrible. And by making the terrible thing funny, the show communicates it to an audience that would not have accepted the terrible thing in a more direct form. Consider how many facts about Springfield are communicated through jokes. The 342 safety violations at the plant, delivered through a gag about the surprised faces of safety inspectors. The fact that Homer has an IQ of 55, delivered as a punchline about his incompetence. The fact that the water supply is contaminated, delivered through the running gag about the 3-eyed fish. The fact that the school is catastrophically underfunded, delivered through jokes about the cafeteria food and the broken equipment. Each of these facts is genuinely alarming. Each of them, presented without the comic frame, would read as an indictment, as a portrait of a community that is being actively harmed by its institutions and by the people who run them. The comedy frame converts the indictment into entertainment, which allows the audience to receive the information without feeling required to do anything about it. This is not a criticism of the show. It is the show's method. It is the only way to say some things to a mass audience and have them actually heard. If you want to tell people that they are living in a contamination zone run by an immortal billionaire for his own benefit, and that the systems designed to protect them are captured by the same interests that are harming them, you cannot say it directly. It will be dismissed. It will be labeled alarmist or political or depressing. But if you wrap it in a yellow cartoon and give Homer a funny voice and make Mr. Burns a figure of comic menace rather than real menace, and surround the whole thing with enough genuine warmth and humor to make it lovable rather than threatening, then maybe the thing gets through. Maybe the joke lands, and the thing underneath the joke lands a second later, quieter, without announcing itself, and settles into the audience's understanding of their world. The Simpsons has been doing this for 36 years. It has been saying terrible true things in the costume of jokes and trusting the audience to hear both the joke and the terrible true thing. And the evidence is that many of them do, because the show is beloved not just as entertainment but as a lens. People use The Simpsons to understand their world. They quote it when they see things that it described. They say, "The Simpsons already did this." And in doing so, they are acknowledging that the show's observations about power and institutions and human behavior have proven durable. The darkness was always there. The comedy kept it safe enough to look at. And looking at it, even through the protective frame of the laugh track and the yellow skin and Homer's voice, was enough to change the way a lot of people see the world. That is not nothing. That is extraordinary. That is, maybe, what the show set out to do in December of 1989, in the living room of a family that looked like a joke and turned out to be a mirror. Section 19. Every season finale and what it left unresolved. The Simpsons season finales have a specific quality that most television analyses miss. They do not resolve. They do not provide the cathartic release that most shows train their audiences to expect at the end of a season. Instead, they tend to arrive at a kind of equilibrium, a restoration of the status quo dressed in the clothes of an ending, which is itself a kind of statement about what the show believes. The most famous is probably the two-part Who Shot Mr. Burns storyline, which ended season 6 with a cliffhanger and opened season 7 with a resolution that satisfied no one entirely, which was possibly the point. As we have discussed elsewhere, the case is closed rather than solved. The town moves on, Burns recovers, Homer returns to work, the sun comes back, everything is as it was. That structure, the event that feels like it should change everything followed by the careful return to the pre-event state, is the Simpsons season finale as a form. It happens again and again. A season ends with the family in a place that seems like it cannot easily continue as before, and then the next season begins with the family having somehow continued as before, and the show does not apologize for this or explain it. The explanation is implicit. The explanation is the floating timeline, is Homer's dream, is Springfield's collective amnesia, is the self-sustaining system that Burns built that depends on everything staying exactly as it is. The explanation is also, some families just survive. Not through resolution, through persistence, through the refusal to let the catastrophe be the last word. The season 4 finale, Camp Krusty, is not typically analyzed as a season finale because it aired in September rather than May. But it is a remarkable episode in ways that map directly onto the show's larger concerns. The children go to a summer camp run under Krusty's brand, but actually managed by a sadistic counselor named Mr. Black, a man who has taken the logic of Springfield's institutions to their natural conclusion. The product exists to generate profit for the person at the top, and the people inside the product, the children in this case, are the raw material rather than the point. Bart leads a rebellion. He overthrows the counselors, he takes over the camp, and then Krusty arrives, summoned by the rebellion's demands, and the show does something interesting. Krusty is genuinely ashamed, not performatively ashamed, not in the way that adults perform remorse when children call them out. He is actually visibly uncomfortable with what was done in his name. He takes the children to the Tijuana resort. He treats them. He makes it right in the only way he knows how, which is extravagantly and with food and entertainment. It is not nothing. It is also not accountability. He did not fix the system. He treated the symptom with luxury. But the children are happy, and Bart's rebellion succeeded in that it produced a response, and the summer is repaired as much as it can be repaired by a sad clown with a large expense account, and the season ends. The next season, none of it is mentioned. Camp Krusty has not changed. Bart has not been radicalized into a community organizer by his successful rebellion. The victory was absorbed by the system. The camp, presumably, continues to operate as before or something like it, and Mr. Black has probably been replaced by someone similar. This is not the show being lazy. This is the show being honest. Institutional change does not happen because children rebel and adults feel ashamed. Institutional change is slower and harder and uglier than that, and the show, which is built on the premise that things essentially do not change, is not going to pretend otherwise. The season ends. The rebellion happened. Nothing changed. And somehow, impossibly, this is also the most hopeful ending available. Bart and his sister and his friends on a Tijuana beach, laughing, the summer salvaged from the machinery that was trying to waste it. That is The Simpsons, the rebellion, the temporary victory, the beach, and then home. Section 20, Coming Home. There is a couch. You know this couch. You have known this couch since before you knew what a couch was for, if you grew up watching this show. It appears in the opening credits every episode, in different configurations, in different gags, the family racing to it from different directions and arriving in different arrangements and doing different absurd things when they land on it. The couch gag is the show's longest-running recurring bit. It is also, if you look at it straight, one of the most emotionally loaded images in American television. The couch is home. The act of getting to the couch, the race through the credits, the arrival, is the act of coming home. And the show has been staging versions of this arrival for 36 years, varying the gag each time, always returning to the same destination. the couch, the living room, the family in their assigned places together. This is the image the show cannot help returning to, no matter how far the individual episodes wander. Homer in space, and Homer at the dog track, and Homer at the bottom of a gorge, and Homer in the middle of his latest catastrophic scheme will all, by the end of the episode, arrive back at the couch. The family will be in the living room. They will be together. That is the promise. That is what the show has been promising since the first episode in 1989 and has kept more or less through everything. No matter what happens in Springfield, no matter what the plant does to the water or what Burns does to the sun or what the accumulated catastrophes of the floating timeline have produced, the family comes home. The couch is there. This is a fantasy, obviously. The show is a cartoon, and the couch is a recurring prop, and the race to it in the opening credits is a joke. But the fantasy is also a wish that a lot of people share and that the show has been honoring for 36 years. The wish that the people you love will be in the same place when you come home, that the chair will be warm, that the kitchen will smell like dinner, that the noise of the house will be the right noise, the particular chaotic warmth of a family that is alive and present and not going anywhere. Homer falls through the door at 5:30 and the family is there. This happens every week. It has been happening every week since 1989. It will keep happening for as long as the show runs. We let it keep happening because we need it to. Because the world outside Springfield is full of things that do not hold. Of families that scattered and chairs that went cold and kitchens that stopped smelling like dinner. And as long as The Simpsons is on, as long as the couch is there and Homer is falling through the door, something is holding. Something is always holding. That is the last and truest thing about The Simpsons. It holds. Through the jokes and the tragedy and the 36 years of accumulated weight, it holds. The family holds, the love holds, the house on Evergreen Terrace with the light in the window holds. And every time you come back to it, every time you sit down and the couch gag plays and the yellow faces appear in their familiar configurations, the house holds for you too. It absorbs your day. It receives whatever you are carrying. It gives you back, for 22 minutes, the feeling of a family that stays. You already know where this ends. You have always known. The couch, the living room, the family, come home. Thank you for being here for all of this. 4 hours in Springfield. If any moment of it landed for you, if any of it changed the way you see the yellow faces you have been watching your whole life, then it did what it was meant to do. Subscribe if you want to keep going. Drop a comment with the time and place you're watching from, and take good care of yourself out there. The Simpsons will still be here when you come back. It always is. End. Section 21. The secondary characters and their entire lives. Springfield is full of people who do not get episodes. They appear in the background of scenes, they serve their narrative function, and then they return to the life the show does not depict, the life between their appearances, and what that life looks like, what it contains, is something the show has always trusted the audience to imagine. Let us spend time with some of them. Patty and Selma Bouvier are Marge's sisters. They smoke constantly. They work at the DMV. They hate Homer with a clarity that borders on purpose, a settled, permanent contempt that has calcified over years of watching their sister subordinate herself to a man they consider unworthy. They are not wrong about Homer, exactly, though their assessment leaves out everything that makes him worth the trouble. But the depth of their dislike is its own kind of love. They hate Homer because they love Marge, because they watched Marge give things up, and they have never forgiven him for being the reason she gave them up. The DMV is a brilliant location for Patty and Selma. They are women of a certain age, middle-aged in that specific American way that the culture treats as an expiration date, working in a government office that is the universal symbol of bureaucratic indifference. People come to the DMV and wait and sigh and receive the experience of being processed through a system that does not care about them individually, and Patty and Selma are the human face of that system. They have become the thing the system made them. They are not this way because they are mean or negligent. They are this way because they work at the DMV and they are middle-aged, and the culture has decided those two facts make them interchangeable with the furniture. But they go home after work. They have an apartment with a cat named Snowball, the original, and photographs on the walls, and an evening routine that involves television and cigarettes, and one imagines each other's company. They have been constants in each other's lives in a way that few people manage. Whatever romantic histories they have, Whatever disappointments and small victories and private griefs the show has occasionally suggested exist in their backstories, they have always had each other. The show treats this as comedy. Two bitter, chain-smoking, middle-aged women sitting together. The image is played for laughs. But under the laughter, two women who never married in the way their culture expected them to, who built a life around their jobs and their shared apartment and each other, who are still there, still smoking, still present, is not a joke at all. It is a portrait of a certain kind of survival. Dr. Nick Riviera is the show's medical joke made human. Hi everybody, the catchphrase, the terrible advice, the procedures performed with incorrect tools, the cavalier relationship with human life that produces comedy and also functions as a portrait of what medicine looks like when it is practiced outside of any regulatory framework, when the profit motive has completely unmoored the practice from any obligation to actually help people. Dr. Nick is Springfield's medical equivalent of Homer's role at the nuclear plant. He provides the service. He holds the credential, or something like a credential. He occupies the position. And the actual competence required to do the job well is almost entirely absent. But Dr. Nick also has a clientele. People go to him. They go to him because he is cheap, because he will do things that a more ethical doctor would refuse to do, because in Springfield's economy the choice between Dr. Nick and no medical care at all is a real choice that many people face, and that the show presents without quite acknowledging how devastating that choice is. The comedy of Dr. Nick is the comedy of a healthcare system that has decided that profit is more important than outcomes, dressed up in one absurdly incompetent individual. The real Dr. Nicks are more subtle and more harmful, and more numerous than the show acknowledges. But the joke lands because the audience recognizes what it is pointing at, even if they laugh rather than rage, which is the show's whole method. Nelson Muntz is the show's portrait of what poverty does to a child, and it deserves far more serious attention than it usually receives. Nelson is Bart's sometime friend and constant antagonist. He is the bully, the threat, the kid from the wrong part of Springfield who has learned to be aggressive because the alternative is to be a target. His home life, when the show depicts it, is one of the most genuinely disturbing in the series. A mother who is absent or checked out, or sometimes genuinely dangerous. A father who is even less present. A house that is not kept. A child essentially raising himself with no resources and no safety net. Nelson mocks. He laughs, his signature laugh at the misfortunes of others. He does this because learned behavior is how you survive in a context where no one has ever taught you anything different, where the emotional register of your household has always been threat and absence, and the particular hardness of a child who discovered very early that softness is not safe. But the show has also shown Nelson's vulnerability. Shown him wanting what Bart has, a parent who shows up, a house with food in it, someone who will be there when he comes home. In the episodes where Nelson and Lisa have a brief romantic connection, the show uses the dynamic to expose Nelson's interior in ways that his defensive toughness usually hides. He wants to be liked. He wants to be chosen. He wants to be in the house that is lit and warm rather than the house that is dark and empty. He does not know how to ask for any of this. He only knows how to be the person the context made him. Nelson is 10 years old and he is already who the town decided he would be. That is the real darkness of his character. Not the bullying, which is a symptom. The prematurity of the certainty. The way that Springfield has already decided what Nelson is for and what he will amount to, and the way that Nelson has absorbed that decision and made it his own because he does not have access to a counter-narrative. The show treats him as comedy. His laugh is one of the most recognizable sounds in the series. But beneath the comedy is a child who needed something that the show's world could not give him, and who built a life around the absence of it, and who will probably grow up to be one of the men at Moe's who no one quite sees clearly. Sideshow Mel is one of the show's most overlooked comic creations and, if you attend to him, one of its saddest. Mel replaced Bob as Krusty's sidekick after Bob went to prison. He has a bone through his hair and an amplified voice and a theatrical manner that suggests a man who was, at some point, seriously invested in the performing arts. His aspirations did not lead where he hoped. He is the sidekick, the second-tier figure, the man who got the job that nobody else wanted after the previous holder committed attempted murder and went to prison. He is there because he was available, and yet he performs. He performs with the commitment of someone who has decided that the role he was given is the role he is going to do justice to, even if the role is undignified and the context is low comedy, and the best he can hope for is not being noticed too much in the wrong way. Mel does his job with theatrical dedication. He is absurd and he knows it and he does it anyway. This is a specific kind of dignity. The dignity of someone who has accepted the life they have and decided to show up for it fully anyway. Not the heroic, triumphant kind, the quiet, daily kind. The kind that shows up in a costume with a bone through its hair and does the thing it was asked to do and goes home. Springfield is full of this kind of dignity. The show is full of it. The characters who are not given the space to be heroic or exceptional, but who keep showing up, keep being who they are, in the specific and imperfect way that is the only way any of us can be anything. Section 22. Homer and Music. Homer's relationship with music is one of the show's most persistent and least analyzed threads, and it reveals something about his character that the comedy format tends to keep in the background. Homer loves music, not in the sophisticated, curated way that Lisa loves it. Homer loves music in the way that people love the things that reach them before they can put up any defenses. He loves the music that was playing when things were good, when he was young, when Marge first smiled at him, when the world was briefly, perfectly the right size. The Barbershop Quartet. The show reveals in Homer's Barbershop Quartet that Homer was part of a successful group called the B Sharps, who had a brief moment of national fame in the late 1980s. The show renders this backstory with genuine affection. Homer singing is one of the show's most unexpectedly moving images, because Homer singing is Homer being more than Homer usually gets to be. He is present, he is connected, he is expressing something that bypasses the damage and the impairment and the noise of his ordinary self and goes straight to wherever the music comes from. Homer sang at the height of his powers, and then the group dissolved, and he returned to the plant and the couch and the beer and the donuts, and the music became a memory. But it is still in him. The show has demonstrated this in various episodes. The ease with which a particular song can transport Homer back to a version of himself that the plant and the years have buried. Music is one of the few things that cuts through the accumulated layers of Homer's numbing and reaches the person underneath. This is why the moments where Homer hums, where he breaks into song while doing something ordinary, where the melody surfaces unbidden, are some of the show's most purely joyful moments. Not because the song is good, though it often is, but because in those moments, Homer is most completely himself, most alive, most present in the world in a way that his ordinary life does not quite allow. The barbershop group was the life Homer did not live. The music is the self that life would have contained, and when it surfaces in the ordinary episodes, in the car or the shower, or standing in the kitchen at midnight, it is the ghost of that other Homer briefly visible inside the Homer that Springfield made. There is an episode where Homer becomes a rock critic. In the episode, his lack of expertise is the joke. Homer does not know anything about music in the formal sense. He cannot analyze it or contextualize it or compare it to its influences, and this is played as comedy against the backdrop of music critics who are too sophisticated to enjoy anything directly. But the episode also reveals something true about Homer and music. He listens with his whole body. He responds physically, viscerally, with a directness that the jaded critics around him have lost the capacity for. He does not know why something is good. He just knows when it is good, and the knowing is unmediated by analysis or irony or the protective layer of sophistication that extended exposure to any art form builds up as a kind of callus. Homer's relationship with music is the relationship of someone who has not been educated out of his first responses. It is unguarded and genuine, and sometimes completely wrong, and sometimes more right than any amount of expertise would produce. It is the ear of a man who loves what he loves without needing to justify the love. This is also, in small ways, Homer's relationship with everything he loves. His family, his food, his town. He loves without analysis. He loves in the immediate, unqualified way that precedes the damage that thinking about love tends to produce. This is his greatest vulnerability and, occasionally, his greatest gift. Marge sings too, less often, more quietly. There are moments in the show, scattered across seasons, where Marge is heard humming in the kitchen or singing to herself while she works, and the quality of what the show gives Julie Kavner to deliver in these moments is distinctive. It is not performance. It is the singing of someone who is alone with themselves and does not know they are being listened to. That specific quality, the singing that happens when no one is watching, is one of the show's most intimate gestures toward Marge's interior. She has a self that she does not perform for anyone. She has an inner life that is not defined by what Homer needs, or what the children need, or what the house needs. And occasionally, in the kitchen, in the moments between the required things, it surfaces as a melody. The show gives you these moments and takes them back quickly, which is its method. But they accumulate, over seasons, into a portrait of a person with depths that her situation rarely allows her to explore. The singing is one of those depths. The painting is another. The patient, private person that Marge is when no one requires her to be anything else is the most interesting person in the Simpson house. We are not always given access to her, but when we are, she is extraordinary. Section 23. What we owe the show. 36 years is a long time to love a television program. It is longer than most relationships. It is longer than some careers. It is certainly longer than the attention span that the contemporary media landscape has conditioned us to expect for anything. The Simpsons has held our attention for 36 years, not by being consistently excellent, though it has had long stretches of genuine excellence. Not by being new, because it has long since stopped being new. It has held our attention because of what it is made of, which is something that does not expire or get canceled, or lose its meaning with distance. It is made of recognition. You watch The Simpsons, and you recognize something. You recognize the specific posture of a tired man on a couch at the end of a hard day. You recognize the particular patience of someone who has been asked to manage too much for too long. You recognize the bright, frustrated intelligence of a child who knows more than the adults around her are willing to admit. You recognize the mischief of a boy who has not yet learned to be afraid of what happens when the joke goes wrong. You recognize the silence of someone who is watching everything and saying nothing and waiting. You recognize all of it because it is yours. Because the show found a way to describe the interior of American life with sufficient precision that the people living that life could see themselves in it, even through the cartoonish distortion of the yellow skin and the four fingers and the impossible hair. That precision is the show's gift. And it is not a small gift. There are very few pieces of art in any medium that manage to look at ordinary life and describe it in a way that makes the people living that life feel seen without being examined or judged or condescended to. Most art about ordinary life, the realistic drama, the social novel, the documentary, ends up looking at its subjects from above with the implicit perspective of someone who has risen above the ordinary and is now describing it to an audience that is also implicitly above it. The Simpsons never had this problem because it was always inside the ordinary. It never rose above it. Homer never became wise enough to transcend his situation. Marge never escaped to the life she might have had. Bart never grew up. Lisa never stopped fighting. They stayed inside the situation and the show stayed with them, and the staying created a perspective that is not available to art that watches from a distance. It is the perspective of someone sitting next to you on the couch. What do we owe the show? After 36 years of it sitting next to us, we owe it attention. The real kind. The kind that goes past the laugh track and the gags and the surface to the thing the gags are carrying. The show has been honest with us for a very long time. The least we can do is be honest back about what the honesty has given us. It has given us Homer, which means it has given us the permission to be imperfect without having to pretend otherwise. Homer is loved. Homer is genuinely, completely loved by the show and by the audience. And Homer is also a disaster by almost every measure. The two things coexist, and the coexistence is permission. You can be a disaster and be loved. You can fall short of everything you intended and still have something that matters. You can be Homer, and the people who love you will still be there when you come home. It has given us Marge, which means it has given us the portrait of a person doing invisible work with grace and patience and occasionally visible strain, and the insistence that this work is the load-bearing wall of everything the family stands on. That the person who does the thankless, continuous, unremarkable labor of keeping things together deserves to be seen clearly, even if the seeing happens 36 years after you first thought she was just the mom in the background. It has given us Bart and Lisa, which means it has given us permission to be both things, the one who acts out and the one who speaks out. the one who breaks the rules and the one who argues about why the rules need to change. It has given us the two siblings who will eventually figure out that their different strategies were always aimed at the same thing: being free inside a world that keeps trying to tell them who they should be. It has given us Maggie, which is to say, it has given us the permission to be quiet, to watch, to absorb the world fully before deciding what to do about it, to hold your intelligence close until the moment it is needed, to know that silence is sometimes the most powerful language available. And it has given us Springfield, which is to say, it has given us ourselves. The town that is everywhere and nowhere, that looks like every town and like no specific town, that contains in its impossible geography and its collective amnesia and its billionaire and its school and its bar and its nuclear plant, the components of the American condition as it has existed for the past 36 years, and as it existed before the show began, and as it will exist after the show ends. The show gave us all of this inside jokes, inside comedy, inside the safe container of entertainment where the truth is allowed to be present because the entertainment provides deniability. We can say it is just a cartoon. We can say Homer is just a gag. We can say the donut is just a donut. But we know, we have always known, the donut is not just a donut. Homer is not just a gag. The show is not just a cartoon. It is the truth in a yellow suit with 4 fingers and a funny voice, falling through the front door at 5:30 and calling out to see if anyone is home. And the family is always there. And the lights are always on. And we are always on the couch. Come home. Thank you. Wherever you are watching from, whatever time it is, whatever brought you here tonight, thank you for your attention and your time. This kind of deep looking takes something from you, and I hope it gave something back. Subscribe if you want more. And take good care. End. Section 24. The Golden Age and Why It Matters That It Ended. There is an ongoing argument in Simpsons fandom, the kind of argument that has been happening for 25 years and will never be resolved, because it is ultimately not about facts but about feelings, about the specific argument of when the show peaked and what the decline meant. The Golden Age is generally agreed to span roughly from Season 3 through Season 8, give or take. These are the years when the show was operating at the highest altitude simultaneously on every dimension: writing, character, emotional depth, cultural impact, satirical precision. The episodes from these years are the ones that defined the show for a generation, the ones that people can still quote in full 20 years later, the ones that produce the moments this entire script has been examining and returning to. And then, somewhere in the late 90s, something shifted. The show got louder, the plots got more elaborate, Homer became more cartoonishly stupid rather than specifically humanly impaired. The emotional center of the episodes, the thing that had always been there under the comedy, became harder to find. The comedy was still there, but it had become the whole thing rather than the container for the thing. What happened? The honest answer is that several things happened simultaneously, as they usually do when a complex creative enterprise begins to change. The original writing staff dispersed as success brought other opportunities. The pressure of being the biggest show on television brought pressures of its own, toward broader jokes, toward the kind of entertainment that could work for the largest possible audience, rather than the specific, precise audience the early show had cultivated. The format, which had always been a constraint that produced creativity, became a formula. But there is also a more emotionally interesting answer, one that connects to everything this script has been exploring. The Golden Age episodes were, at their core, about a family managing the conditions of working-class American life with love and difficulty and imperfect grace. They were grounded, they were specific. Homer's sadness was the sadness of a specific man in a specific job with a specific history. Marge's patience was the patience of a specific woman with specific suppressed ambitions. The children's struggles were specific to childhood in a specific American time and place. When the show began to drift toward the surreal and the spectacular, when Homer started going to space and meeting dozens of celebrities and having adventures that bore no relationship to the kitchen and the couch, it was departing from the specific and reaching for the general. And the general, however entertaining, does not produce the feeling of recognition that made the Golden Age episodes so powerful. The Golden Age episodes made people feel seen. The later episodes entertained them. These are different experiences. Entertainment is easier to produce at scale. Being seen requires something that cannot be manufactured, a willingness to stay close to the particular rather than the universal, to trust that the specific detail will resonate more broadly than the broad gesture. The early writers of The Simpsons had that trust. They wrote episodes about Homer trying to quit drinking not because alcoholism was universally relatable, but because the specificity of that struggle, the specific way it expressed Homer's particular psychology and history, would be recognized by anyone who had ever watched someone they loved fight a losing battle with something they were using to cope with a life that felt too heavy. The trust in specificity is what made the Golden Age golden. And when that trust began to erode, when the show began to reach for the spectacle rather than the detail, the gold dimmed. This is not irreversible. The show has had remarkable individual episodes long past the Golden Age, moments where the old quality reasserts itself, where the show remembers what it is for and does it with something approaching its original precision. These episodes are less frequent than they used to be, but they exist, and they exist as evidence that the capacity is still there, that the show still knows what it is made of, even when it is not always able to access it. The specific episodes from the Golden Age that deserve the most attention are the ones that do not appear on most top 10 lists. The celebrated ones, The Streetcar Named Marge, The Homer at the Bat, The Last Exit to Springfield, are celebrated for good reasons and do not need more defense here. But there are episodes in the Golden Age run that are rarely discussed and that contain some of the show's most precise emotional work. Saturdays of Thunder, Season 3. Homer realizes he does not know anything about his son. He takes a test, he fails the test. He dedicates himself to learning about Bart, specifically, as a person, with the same undivided attention he rarely gives to anything. And in doing so, he discovers something that the show has always known, but has rarely said this directly. Bart is extraordinary. Bart is brave and creative and loyal and alive in a way that the school and the town have never quite accounted for. Homer discovers his son in this episode, really discovers him, and the discovering is done with a gentleness that the show only allows Homer in its most honest moments. Separate vocations. Season 3. Lisa discovers that she is better suited, by standard aptitude testing, to a career as a housewife than a professional musician. Bart, in the same testing, discovers he would make an excellent police officer. The episode inverts the characters' established roles. Lisa becomes rule-bound and rigid, enforcing the system. Bart becomes compassionate and protective, defending a boy who steals. The episode is asking whether the identities we build are the identities we are stuck with, and whether the roles we perform are the people we are or the armor we wear. The answer it arrives at is characteristically Simpsons. Both. We are the armor and the person underneath it simultaneously, and telling them apart takes more clarity than most of us manage. Colonel Homer. Season 3. Homer becomes the manager of a country singer named Lurleen Lumpkin. Lurleen falls in love with him. And the episode, which could have been played entirely as a comedy of Homer's obliviousness, is actually a careful, serious examination of what it looks like when a married man holds a boundary. Homer feels the attraction, he acknowledges it, and then he goes home to Marge because he chose Marge, genuinely chose her, not because the other option is not appealing, but because choosing is what love requires. The episode ends with Homer and Marge together, which is not a surprise. But it ends with Homer having made a real choice, rather than having the choice made for him by circumstance, and the difference matters. These episodes are Golden Age episodes not because they have perfect jokes, though they do, but because they treat their characters as people with real interior lives making real decisions. They trust the audience to follow the complexity. They do not explain or underline or make sure you know how to feel. They just present the thing and trust you to be present with it. Section 25. The animation that carried the feeling. The show's visual language is not neutral. Most analyses of The Simpsons focus on the writing, which is correct as a matter of emphasis. The show is, first and foremost, a writer's show. But the animation has its own expressive capacity, and the ways in which the show's visual style has been used to communicate emotional content that the dialogue cannot carry is worth examining. The yellow. It has been noted many times that the character's yellow skin was originally chosen because it would stand out on a screen full of other content, because the bright yellow is immediately recognizable and distinctive. This is the production history. But within the show's visual grammar, the yellow is also doing something else. Yellow is the color of sunlight, of warmth, of the cheerful, and the uncomplicated. It is the color we associate with openness, with happiness, with the particular light of a summer afternoon. And the show put this color on people whose inner lives are deeply complicated, who carry grief and damage and longing, who are anything but uncomplicated. The yellow is the costume they wear, the surface that the world sees, the performance of the uncomplicated that covers everything else. The eyes are important. The eyes of the Springfield residents are large and slightly protruding, designed for maximum expressiveness in a medium that cannot use the full range of human facial subtlety. And the show uses them. The animators have always known how to use the eyes to carry emotional information that the script does not deliver directly. The way Homer's eyes soften when he looks at Marge in a particular scene. The way Lisa's eyes hold something when she is trying not to show how much something has hurt her. The way Maggie's eyes, enormous and fixed, watch everything with an attention that the comedy frame suggests is comedy, but which, if you receive it as documentary, is actually fairly unsettling. The hands, Homer's hands, which the show uses constantly as a comedic prop, also carry information. When Homer reaches for something he wants, the gesture is large and unself-conscious, the reach of someone who has not learned to moderate his desires in public. When Homer touches Marge, the gesture is different. Careful, slightly uncertain, the touch of a man who knows how lucky he is and is still not quite sure he is allowed to be this lucky. The hands do this work silently, in the background of scenes where the dialogue is doing something else, and the audience absorbs it without quite registering that they are absorbing it. The show has also, particularly in the Golden Age, used visual composition with more sophistication than it is usually given credit for. The way a scene is framed, where the characters are positioned in relation to each other and to the physical space of a room, communicates things about their relationships that the words do not. Homer in a doorway, half in and half out of a room, is a different image than Homer at the center of the frame. Lisa alone in a wide shot is the same loneliness as Lisa in a crowd, differently expressed but unmistakable in both cases. The couch gag is the most sophisticated piece of visual storytelling the show produces on a weekly basis, and it is the piece that is most consistently underrated because it precedes the episode and is received as warm-up rather than content. But the variations on the gag, the ways in which the family's arrival at the couch is staged and arranged and occasionally subverted, have told small, complete stories about the family's nature and their relationship to each other. The show has been doing this since the beginning. The opening credits are not credits. They are the show's weekly statement of itself, its reminder to the audience of what it is and what it is for. And at the end of the credits, every time, the family arrives. They land on the couch. They are together. The visual language is saying, they are still here. They are always here. Whatever happened in the last week, in the episode that just aired and the episodes before it, the family is back on the couch. The image holds. The family holds. The animation carries this in every frame, in the yellow and the eyes and the hands and the couch and the blue tower of hair, and the specific way that Homer's face looks when he is about to eat something, or say something terrible, or catch a glimpse of something that bypasses his damage and goes straight to the love. Section 26. The letters the show has written. The Simpsons has written many letters across its run. Not literal letters, though those appear sometimes. Emotional letters. The episodes that are addressed to someone, that have a recipient even if that recipient is never named. And Maggie Makes Three is a letter to Maggie, specifically. To the specific weight of a daughter whose existence cost something and gave something back beyond accounting. Homer tells the story, and at the end, the photographs are on the plaque and the letter is complete. I did this for you. The letter is not mailed. Maggie is too young to read it, but it exists in the episode, addressed to her for whenever she is ready. Mother Simpson is a letter to every adult child who lost a parent before they understood what was lost. Not to death, though death comes later. To circumstance. To the systems that separate families without ceremony or explanation. To the specific grief of growing up not knowing whether you were loved by the person who left. The letter says, you were loved. She loved you. The leaving was not about you. The letter arrives 27 years late. The episode gives it to you anyway. Bart Gets an F is a letter to every child who tried their hardest and found that their hardest was not enough, and who cried in a classroom when the grade came back and knew that this was not about intelligence or laziness, but about a gap. That effort alone cannot close. The letter says, someone sees the trying. Someone will give you the extra point, not because you earned it conventionally, but because the trying is its own form of earning. The letter is Mrs. Krabappel's letter, written to Bart, and by extension to everyone who was Bart. Lisa's substitute is a letter to every lonely, intelligent child who has been seen, once, clearly by an adult who knew how to see them. It says, that moment was real. The person who saw you was real. You carry what happened in that room. You are Lisa Simpson. Homer's enemy is a letter to everyone who played by the rules and watched someone else win by not playing them. It is not a comfortable letter. It does not promise that the unfairness will be corrected, or that effort will eventually be rewarded, or that the system is better than it looks. It is a letter that says, yes, this is real. The unfairness is real. And the show does not know what to do about that either. The letter is signed, sorry. The show has been writing these letters for 36 years. They accumulate in the viewer's memory alongside the jokes and the gags and the catchphrases, and they make up the archive of recognition that is the show's deepest gift. The record of being seen, the record of someone looking at ordinary American life and saying, I see this, I see you in this. You are not imagining the difficulty of it. Section 27. What Springfield will always be. Springfield will always be the town that does not appear on any map. It will always have mountains and an ocean and a desert within driving distance, and the physical impossibility of this will never be explained or resolved. It will always have a nuclear power plant with cracked cooling towers, and a three-eyed fish in the river, and a billionaire who cannot quite remember the name of his most loyal employee. Springfield will always have Moe's Tavern, with the bad light and the indifferent beer, and the small group of men who have built their evening routine around the specific comfort of being in a room with people who expect nothing from them. Springfield will always have the elementary school with the inadequate budget and the demoralized teachers and the children who are trying, or trying not to try, or trying to figure out which one is the right strategy. Springfield will always have the retirement home where the old people sit in their institutional chairs and tell their stories to whoever has not yet left the room. Springfield will always have the church where Reverend Lovejoy delivers his sermons to a congregation that is physically present and spiritually elsewhere, and where Ned Flanders sits in his pew and prays to a God who seems to be slightly more talkative with the man next door. And Springfield will always have the house on Evergreen Terrace, the house with the green grass and the red roof and the doorbell that Homer has not gotten around to fixing for 36 years. The house where the kitchen always smells like whatever Marge is cooking, and the living room has the couch and the television and the slightly wrong geometry that suggests things were added on over time without a real plan. The house where Homer falls through the door at 5:30. The house where Marge is already there. The house where Bart is somewhere in it, doing something inadvisable, or sitting quietly with his thoughts in the way he sometimes does when nobody is watching. The house where Lisa's saxophone can be heard from the street if you stand still long enough to listen. The house where Maggie is in her bouncer, taking everything in. That house, that family, those people. We have been living in that house alongside them for 36 years. We have watched them fail and love and forget and try again, and sit on the couch and eat the dinner and fight and forgive and fall asleep in front of the television and wake up and do it all again. We know them in the way you know your own family, which is to say, imperfectly, completely, with all the complicated feeling that familiarity produces. We know things about them that they do not know about themselves because we have been watching from outside the frame, and we have seen the things the comedy frame covered, and the things the laugh track rushed past, and the things that the show trusted us to find if we were paying attention. We found them. We have been finding them for 36 years. And what we found? Under the yellow skin and the four fingers and the jokes and the gags and the floating timeline that keeps everyone safely frozen at the ages they were in 1989, what we found was people. Real, imperfect, loving, failing, trying, surviving people. That is all the show has ever been. That is everything the show has always been. People. A family. A house with the lights on. Come home to Springfield one more time. Close your eyes. Let the opening credits play behind them, the music coming in, the clouds parting, the camera swooping down into the town you have always known, Bart at the chalkboard, the saxophone line, Homer at the plant, the car ride, the house, the couch, the family landing together. That is the show. That is all of it. Rest now. You can come back anytime. They will be there. Thank you for 4 hours in Springfield. Sweet dreams. Section 28. The characters who never got their episode. Every recurring character in Springfield is carrying a story that the show never had time to tell in full. This is true of all long-running ensemble shows, but in The Simpsons, where the peripheral characters are often as richly sketched as the principals, the untold stories accumulate into something that feels less like an editorial decision and more like a whole other show running alongside the one that actually aired. Martin Prince is one of the most interesting cases. He is the class genius, the academic overachiever, the child who has defined himself entirely through institutional success and who is being crushed by the same institution that appears to reward him. Martin's academic performance is his armor. It is the thing that gives him status in a world that would otherwise have very little use for him. And the armor is also a cage. It keeps him from developing any identity outside the achievement, which means that the child underneath the straight-A student, the real Martin, the person who has fears and wants and a full emotional life, is effectively invisible. The show has gestured at Martin's inner life in brief, sympathetic moments. He is not just a punchline about sycophantic overachievement. He is a child who learned very early that the only acceptance available to him in his social environment was conditional on being exceptional, and who has spent his school career working desperately to maintain the condition. What Martin needs is someone to tell him that he is enough without the grades. That the grades, while real, are not the person. That the person underneath the perfect test scores is worth knowing for reasons that have nothing to do with academic performance. Nobody in Springfield seems equipped to offer Martin this. The school rewards him for what the grades represent. His peers tolerate him when they tolerate him because he is useful for homework help. And his parents, when we see them, are the particular brand of ambitious, middle-class parent that produces Martins by communicating, without quite saying it, that love is contingent on the achievement continuing. Martin's story is the story of what happens when children internalize the conditions of their acceptance so thoroughly that they can no longer imagine themselves as acceptable without meeting those conditions. It is a story about the particular cruelty of a culture that loves its exceptional children for their exceptionalism rather than for themselves. The show never gives Martin an episode that resolves this. He remains the class genius, the peripheral figure, the punchline, and the study partner. His inner life is a suggestion, not a story. But the suggestion is enough to feel the weight of what is not being said. Ralph Wiggum is perhaps the show's most mysterious character because the mystery is not legible from the surface. Ralph says things that do not make sense. He makes connections that are not connections. He inhabits a world that runs on different logic than the one everyone around him is operating in, and the show plays this for comedy, which it is. Ralph's non-sequiturs are some of the funniest lines in the series. But they are also, if you receive them differently, something else. Ralph lives in a world where the distance between internal experience and external expression is total. He says what he is experiencing without any of the social mediation that teaches most people to edit their interior before it reaches their mouth. The result is statements that seem random from the outside but which are, presumably, exactly accurate from the inside. When Ralph says that his cat's breath smells like cat food, this is a true statement about his cat's breath. He is not making a joke. He is reporting. The comedy is the context receiving his report as a non sequitur when it is, to Ralph, simply observation. What kind of interior life does Ralph have? The show does not say, and this is not an oversight. The show is careful about Ralph. It never pathologizes him, never sends him to specialists, never makes him a character about disability in the way that a more earnest show might. It just lets him be Ralph, with all of Ralph's difference intact, in a world that is too distracted by its own concerns to look at him closely enough to understand what he is. Ralph is, in some ways, the purest version of the show's recurring theme of people who are not seen clearly by the community they live in. He is invisible in the way that all of Springfield's most interesting people are invisible, by not fitting the categories the community uses to value people. He is not smart in the academic sense. He is not conventionally capable. He does not compete for the hierarchies that organize Springfield's social world. He is just Ralph. In whatever way Ralph is Ralph, which is entirely, completely, without self-consciousness or apology. The show loves him for this. You can feel it in the writing of his lines, and in that love there is something worth holding on to. The character who cannot or will not perform the expected self is often the character the show looks at with the most tenderness. Ralph, Maggie, the version of Homer that appears in his most vulnerable moments. The characters who are not performing are the ones the show wants you to see most clearly. Superintendent Chalmers is one of the show's most durable recurring figures and one of its clearest portraits of institutional frustration. He is the district superintendent, the person nominally responsible for the performance of Springfield schools, which means he is nominally responsible for a situation that is beyond any individual's capacity to fix. He knows this. You can see that he knows this in the particular quality of his exasperation, which is the exasperation of someone who has been exasperated for too long and who has made a kind of peace with the exasperation by converting it into a personality trait. Superintendent Chalmers is always surprised by Principal Skinner, or by the condition of the school, or by whatever disaster is current, in a way that makes no sense given how long he has been involved with Springfield Elementary. He has seen everything this school can produce. He should not still be capable of astonishment, and yet he is. Every visit produces the same raised eyebrows, the same incredulous stare, the same question that should not need to be asked again but is being asked again because that is the nature of this institution. The comedy of Chalmers is the comedy of institutional memory failure. The system keeps producing the same outcomes, and the person responsible for the system keeps responding to those outcomes as if they are new, as if something could be different, as if this time will be the time that Skinner's school manages to meet a basic standard. The astonishment is hopeful in a perverse way. It is the astonishment of someone who has not fully given up on the possibility of improvement, who keeps arriving with fresh eyes even when the eyes have seen everything before. Or perhaps the astonishment is simply the reflex of a man who has been in this role too long, whose responses have calcified into patterns that no longer reflect genuine surprise, but which he performs because the alternatives are worse. Acceptance, which would require acknowledging that nothing will change. Rage, which would be both understandable and counterproductive. He lands on astonishment because it is the affect that still leaves the door open. Chalmers is the show's portrait of middle management in a broken institution. He is the man between the impossible standards above him and the impossible conditions below him, doing the work of translating between the two, absorbing the friction of the translation, and returning the next week to do it again. He has a life outside this work, presumably. A home, people he talks to about things other than Springfield Elementary. But the show does not show us that life. The show gives us the astonishment and the catchphrase and the visits that always go wrong, and trusts us to imagine the rest. The rest is a tired man driving home from a school that cannot be fixed, eating dinner in a kitchen that is not a disaster for once, sleeping in a bed that is his own, and setting an alarm to get up and go back. That is most jobs. That is most of the time. The Simpsons knows this and shows it to you in Superintendent Chalmers every time he arrives at Springfield Elementary, expecting something different. The last character worth spending time with is not a character at all, in the conventional sense. It is Springfield itself, considered not as a setting but as a consciousness. The town taken as a whole, as a single distributed entity made of all its residents, and their shared assumptions, and their collective denials, and their agreed-upon fictions, and their genuine love for each other, is a character with its own psychology, its own patterns, its own recurring behaviors. And the behavior that defines Springfield, the one that runs through every season, every episode, every reset and restart and return to normal, is the behavior of a community that chooses, consistently and collectively, to absorb rather than confront, to accept rather than resist, to love the people it has and the town it is, despite everything it knows about the conditions that produced both, because the alternative is an honesty that would require changes that nobody is equipped to make. Springfield chooses the lie, as the Seymour Skinner episode showed us. Springfield chooses comfort over truth, as the collective amnesia shows us in every reset. Springfield chooses the status quo, as Burns's monopoly demonstrates through its 36-year maintenance, Because the status quo is familiar, and because the people inside it are tired, and because changing things requires a kind of courage that the conditions of Springfield, the radiation and the economics and the institutional failures have made harder to summon. And yet Springfield keeps going. It survives. The people in it love each other, imperfectly and genuinely. The Moe's regulars are there every night. The church is full on Sundays. The school is held together by teachers who have not entirely given up, and parents who send their children in good faith that something valuable will happen. The neighborhood has the character of a place that knows its own name, that has been inhabited long enough to develop the particular texture of somewhere that has lived through things. Springfield is a flawed community doing the best it can with what it has, which is a description of most communities and most people and most families that have managed to hold together for a long time. The flaws are real. The best is imperfect. The holding is the thing. That is Springfield. That is The Simpsons. That is the thing the show has been saying, in every possible way it could find to say it, for 36 years and nearly 800 episodes. We are flawed. We are doing the best we can. We are holding. Now rest. Springfield will be exactly as you left it when you come back. The family will be on the couch. The lights will be on. Homer will have just gotten home. Marge is in the kitchen. Bart is somewhere in the house. Lisa is playing her saxophone. And Maggie is watching. Good night.